Han Kyung-tae didn't flinch when he pressed the barrel of his gun against the back of Zuri Ellington's skull. He didn't hesitate. He didn't warn her. He just grabbed her by the collar of her coat in the parking garage beneath her apartment building at 10:15 on a Wednesday night, shoved her face first into the concrete pillar, hard enough to split her lip, and said, very quietly, the way a man says something he has said before, walk. Don't scream, don't turn around. 12 years. 12 years this man had sat across conference tables from her, had eaten lunch in the same building, had nodded at her in hallways and called her Miss Ellington with something almost resembling respect. And now his hand was in her hair, and her blood was on the concrete, and he was steering her toward a black sedan like she was cargo. If you have ever trusted someone who turned out to be capable of something like this, someone you worked beside, someone whose habits you knew, someone whose coffee order you could recite from memory, then you already understand what happened to Zuri's body in that moment. Not panic, not screaming, just a terrible clarifying cold. The kind that tells you, this is real, and you are alone, and you have to think. She thought. That's the only reason she survived. Before we go any further, if this kind of story reaches something in you, if you've ever wondered what you would do when the person you least expected becomes the most dangerous one in the room, hit that subscribe button right now. Ring the notification bell. Leave a comment with the name of your city or your country. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Drop a like if you're already hooked. And stay with me all the way to the end, because nothing about what's coming is what you're expecting. The night Kwon Jae-hwan found Zuri Ellington tied to a chair in an abandoned corporate tower above the Chicago River, he had been awake for 31 hours. He didn't look it. He never looked anything. That was part of the problem with the man. You could not read exhaustion in his face any more than you could read regret or fear, or the particular kind of dread that had been sitting in his chest since 7:40 that morning when he walked into his office and found her desk empty and her silver watch lying beside her keyboard. He stood there longer than he would ever admit, just stood there looking at it. Her desk was never empty at 7:40. Zuri Ellington arrived before him every morning, without exception, not because she was required to, but because she was the kind of person who treated preparation like a form of dignity. Her desk was always in a specific state of organized tension, 3 pens in precise positions, a legal pad with that morning's priority items already ranked, her coffee half finished, her reading glasses folded to the left of the monitor, and that watch on her wrist. Always on her wrist. It had belonged to her father. She'd told Jae-hwan that exactly once, not as a confidence but as an explanation, when he'd asked why she wore something so plain when he paid her enough to buy whatever she liked. It's not about what it looks like, she said. It's about what it means. He had not responded to that. He rarely responded when she said something that landed harder than he expected. The watch was silver, simple, slightly scratched near the clasp. It sat beside her keyboard like an accusation. Jae-hwan did not immediately call for Sung-won. He did not immediately raise any alarm. He picked up the watch, held it for approximately 4 seconds, set it back down, and then walked to his window and looked at the city for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then he called Sung-won. Find her, he said. No name. No explanation. Sung-won had worked beside him for 9 years and understood immediately. Already on it, Sung-won said, which meant he had already noticed she was gone and had already started pulling security feeds, which meant Sung-won had also understood that something was wrong before anyone said it out loud. That did not comfort Jae-hwan. It confirmed something he didn't want confirmed, that whatever was happening, it wasn't sudden. It had been building, and he had not seen it. Kwon Jae-hwan had been operating in Chicago's underworld for 15 years by the time any of this happened. He had not built his organization through spectacular violence. He had built it through something more durable and more exhausting than violence. He built it through patience, through precision, through an ability to identify what a person wanted most and position himself as the only reliable source of that thing, whether the thing was money, protection, access, or simply the feeling of being taken seriously. He was 41 years old, Korean American, born in Chicago, raised between two worlds in the way that makes a person fluent in both and fully comfortable in neither. His father had died when Jae-hwan was 17, not romantically, not violently, just quickly, the way an overworked man with an undetected heart condition goes on a Tuesday afternoon alone before anyone could get to him. His uncle Tae-sung had stepped into the gap immediately and completely, which at 17 had felt like rescue. It took Jae-hwan 20 years to understand the difference between rescue and acquisition. His organization operated legitimate businesses across 4 sectors: shipping logistics, private security contracting, luxury hospitality, and commercial real estate, and the legitimate businesses were not cover. They were real, functioning, profitable enterprises. The criminal interests existed alongside them in a structure so carefully compartmentalized that most of his employees had no idea what else the organization did. Jae-won preferred it that way. Ignorance was not a management failure in his world. It was a design feature. What he was not, and had never been, was sentimental. Except that he had hired Zuri Ellington 3 years ago, and whatever he was around her, it was not nothing. She had come to him through a recommendation from a compliance attorney he trusted, which was already unusual because Jae-hwan did not trust many attorneys. The recommendation was blunt. She's the most competent executive assistant I've ever worked with. She has an uncomfortable memory for detail, and she will absolutely tell you when you're wrong, which you will hate and which you desperately need. Jae-won had hired people who told him when he was wrong before. They tended not to last long, not because he punished them, but because the organizational culture around him made that kind of honesty structurally exhausting to maintain. People softened. People learned that a certain quality of silence was rewarded, and a certain quality of directness was tolerated, but not encouraged. Zuri didn't soften. She showed up for her first week, absorbed the environment, and on the 8th day told him, without preamble, that his Thursday afternoon meeting schedule was designed to exhaust him before the most consequential decision of his week, and that she was restructuring it. She did not ask, she informed. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back with the patience of someone who had decided that if this was going to be a confrontation, it could be a confrontation. He said, "Fine." That was 3 years ago. In 3 years, she had become so embedded in the operational architecture of his life that removing her would have required restructuring 18 different workflows. She managed his schedule, his correspondence, his access points, his documentation protocols. She was the person who knew which calls he actually needed to take and which ones Sung-won could handle. She was the person who remembered that he had a tension headache coming when he stopped using his left hand to gesture during meetings. She was the person who, on a Tuesday in March, when he had made a decision in anger that he had not publicly walked back but had privately regretted, set a document on his desk, without comment, that outlined a cleaner resolution to the same problem. She infuriated him regularly. She challenged him in ways that no lieutenant would risk. She refused to perform the particular kind of deference that his world had taught him to expect from people in her position. And he had, without meaning to and without ever naming it, come to depend on her in a way that went beyond her job description. He had not examined that dependency closely. He was not a man who examined his own interior life with any particular rigor. Tongues had seen it before Jae-hwan did. That was the thing that would come out later and sit in Jae-hwan's stomach like something he couldn't digest. His uncle had seen it, understood its implications, and had started planning around it. The security footage was not subtle once Seung-won found the right sequence. Kyung-tae's sedan appeared in 3 separate camera angles near the block where Zuri had been seen leaving the cafe she visited. On Wednesday evenings, a small place 6 blocks from her apartment where she went for tea and an hour of silence. Cameras showed his car parked across the street at 9:50. Showed it again near her building's parking garage at 10:12. Showed it leaving the area at 10:27. Zuri's phone went dark at 10:19. Sung-won brought the footage to Jae-hwan at 3 in the afternoon. He laid it out without editorializing. He had worked with Jae-hwan long enough to know that presentation mattered, that what you said first shaped how everything else was received. and that Jae-hwan in the first 30 seconds of bad news was a different instrument than Jae-hwan 3 minutes in. Jae-hwan watched the footage twice, did not speak. The second thing someone told him was what had happened in the morning meeting. Kyung Tae had arrived at the building at 8:15. He had passed Zuri's desk, noted her absence, and had said to the junior coordinator nearby, "She's probably running late." Traffic. A normal thing to say. The kind of thing anyone says. Except that at 8:15, nobody in the building had formally registered that Zuri was not present. There had been no report, no flag, no discussion. The junior coordinator had simply assumed the boss's secretary was running late and hadn't thought about it further. Kyung Tae had known she was gone before any alarm existed to know. He was at that desk for 11 seconds, someone said. He looked at the keyboard. Then he looked away and said she was probably stuck in traffic. Jae-hwan was quiet for a moment. He looked at the keyboard, Jae-hwan said. Yes, the watch. Kyung Tae had seen the watch, had understood in one glance what it meant that the watch was there without Zuri, had then manufactured a casual, forgettable explanation and walked on. 12 years. 12 years of proximity, 12 years of access, 12 years of Jae-hwan believing that the man who had been at his shoulder through 3 organizational crises and 1 federal inquiry was the closest thing he had to a reliable second. What Jae-hwan felt in that moment was not the hot explosive thing that people imagine when they think about a man like him receiving this kind of information. It was something colder and more structural, like a load-bearing wall failing. Not a fire, a collapse. Where is she? Jae-hwan said. It was not a question. We're close, Sung-won said. I think I know the building. The Meridian Tower had been empty for 6 years. 42 stories of concrete and glass and silence above the Chicago River, sealed after its development company had dissolved in a legal dispute that was still grinding through the courts. Sung-won had found it by tracing a pattern in Zuri's recovered phone activity from the previous 36 hours. She had been doing her own research before she disappeared, and that research had touched on property records and corporate registrations that connected, through 3 removes, to an LLC that Kyung Tae had used to run transactions through 2 years ago. She had known something. She had been building a case. She had not yet had enough to bring it forward, and then she had run out of time. The building had a service entrance on its north side that Sang-won-wan's team breached quietly at 11:30. 8 men in total, moving through stairwells that smelled like cold concrete and standing water, up to the 14th floor where a motion sensor registered their approach on a device someone had installed specifically for this night. Jae-hwan was with them. Sung-won had not argued about that, because there was no argument available that would have worked, and he knew it. A sound the fate felt it. They found her on the 14th floor, in what had been a corner conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. The room was empty of furniture except for the chair she was tied to and a single emergency light on a battery pack that flickered in a rhythm that felt almost deliberate. She was alive. He registered that first. Then he registered the split on her lower lip and the way she was holding her right shoulder and the specific quality of stillness she was maintaining, not calm, not acceptance, but active, deliberate, managed control. She was managing herself the way a person manages themselves when they have decided that falling apart is not an option available to them. He moved toward her. She said, "Don't," not loudly. Not with panic in it, exactly, but with something that stopped him faster than a shout would have. "Don't come any closer. Stop." He stopped. She was looking at the floor between them, looking at a specific point on the floor, about 4 feet in front of his position. And then he saw the nearly invisible filament of a wire that ran from the baseboard on his left to a device he had not immediately identified, because it was designed not to be immediately identified. Motion sensor, pressure trigger, whatever was on the other end of it, he didn't know and didn't need to know. Point was the space between them. Behind him, Sung-won and his men had gone completely still. The room was quiet enough that the river below was audible, a low, moving sound, indifferent and constant. Then a phone rang. It was an old phone, the kind with a physical bell, sitting on the windowsill 10 feet to Zuri's right. It rang 3 times. Jae-hwan didn't move. Zuri didn't move. It stopped. "They're watching," she said. Her voice was steady. That steadiness cost her something. He could see it. Cost her something, but she was paying it deliberately. "They've been watching since you came in." "Who set this up?" he said. She looked at him. There were things in her face that he had never seen there before, not fear exactly, but the residue of fear that remains after a person has already been afraid for long enough that they've burned through the acute version and arrived somewhere grimmer. She was past the shaking. She was in the part that came after. "I found something," she said, 3 days ago, in the system. "Tell me." "Someone was using my credentials, accessing your schedule, your routes, your security arrangements, changing things, small things, nothing that would trip a flag unless you were looking for it specifically. You were looking for it. I noticed a discrepancy in a Tuesday routing log. It took me 4 hours to trace it back to an entry point. The credentials were mine, but the access pattern wasn't." She paused. Swallowed. "The sessions were initiated from a terminal I've never used." "Kyung Tae," he said. She didn't confirm it immediately. "I followed it backward through 6 weeks of records. Whoever was doing it was careful, very careful. But there was a pattern in the timing, always after 10 p.m., always from the same terminal, always masked through an internal relay that shouldn't have had that kind of access." She looked at him steadily. The relay was registered under a service account that Kyung Tae's department controls. Jae-hwan was very still. "I found an archived message in a communications thread that had been flagged for routine deletion. It had been sitting there for 3 weeks. It wasn't encrypted because whoever sent it didn't think it would ever be found." She breathed. Just breathed for a moment. It said 4 words. "Kwon comes for Ellington." The room held that for a moment. "I understood what it meant," she said. "I was the bait, whatever they were planning, whatever was supposed to happen in this building tonight. It only works if you come. And you were always going to come." She said the last part without accusation, but without softness either. Was just observation. Accurate, precise, and slightly devastating. "You tried to reach someone," he said, "that afternoon." He didn't answer, I found out. Later, his phone had been rerouted. "I left a message with a number he would recognize from a protocol we'd set up. And then I went to retrieve the flash drive I'd been building with the documentation." "Kyung Tae found you first." "In the parking garage," she said. "He had my phone blocked before I reached my car." Jae-hwan looked at the floor between them, looked at the thin wire, thought about the geometry of the room and the location of the rear stairwell and the specific of the device on the wall. "Sungwon," he said without turning. "Already moving," Sungwon said from behind him, very quietly. "Take the rear," Jae-hwan said. "Give me 2 minutes." He heard Sungwon's footsteps recede. Zuri watched him. "What are you doing?" Giving him time to circle around. "If they see movement on the sensor has a range. Sungwon knows where the edge of it is. He's done this before." She looked at him with an expression that sat somewhere between exasperation and something she wasn't naming. "You could have just led with that. I'm leading with it now." They stood there 10 feet apart, a wire between them, an occupied city visible through the windows behind her, and the silence had a different quality now. Not the silence of the room. The silence of 2 people who had been in proximity for 3 years and had never quite had the conversation that this particular silence was circling. "You counted on me coming," he said. "I was counting on you being exactly who you are," she said. "Which I'm not sure is a compliment. It got you the cavalry." The cavalry walked into the same trap that was designed for the cavalry. "Cavalry brought Sungwon." He paused. "Also, you kept me from walking across that wire, which means whatever you think you were doing here, you were also protecting me." She was quiet for a moment. "Don't read too much into it." "I'm not reading anything into it. You have a very specific expression you get when you're filing something away for later. I don't know what you're talking about. You're doing it right now." He was quiet. "Then the flash drive. I hid it before he grabbed me. It's in a location that I will tell Sungwon personally and not broadcast in a room that may still have active audio." Smart. Frustratingly. Consistently smart. Even tied to a chair in an abandoned building with a split lip, she was running operational protocol. "Are you hurt badly?" he asked. "Badly enough," she said. "Not badly enough that I won't walk out of here." "Your shoulder." He grabbed me hard. "It's probably bruised. Possibly something else. I haven't had time to assess it properly." "You've been here since last night." "Since approximately 10:30, she confirmed. "Yes." The math of that 12 hours alone in this room, in that chair, with nothing to do but manage her own fear and think landed somewhere in Jae-hwan's chest that he didn't have a name for. He stood with it. Then he heard from somewhere behind the far wall a single soft knock. The signal Sung-won was in position. "We're about to have company from behind you," he said. "Don't react when you hear movement." "I assumed," she said. 3 seconds later, Sung-won appeared from the service door behind Zuri's chair, moved silently to her side, and began working on the restraints. She didn't flinch, didn't make a sound. Just kept her eyes on Jae-hwan and kept her breathing even, and he kept his eyes on her, and the wire sat between them, and the city sat below, and the emergency light flickered the way things flicker when nobody is maintaining them. The last restraint came loose. Zuri stood slowly, favoring her right side. Sung-won steadied her with a hand she did not shake off, which told Jae-hwan the shoulder was worse than she'd said. Sung-won walked her backward toward the service door. Jae-hwan began moving laterally, around the perimeter of the room, away from the wire, toward the same door. The phone on the windowsill rang again. He did not look at it. None of them looked at it. They left it ringing in the dark. The armored car was warm, which seemed almost incongruous. Zuri sat in the rear seat with a thermal blanket that someone had thought to bring, holding it around herself with her good arm, and she looked out the window at the city moving past and didn't say anything for about 90 seconds, which was how long it took for the controlled adrenaline of the building to start metabolizing into something rawer. Jae-hwan watched her without appearing to watch her. He had a specific skill for this. 12 hours alone in that room. He was performing his own quiet accounting of what that cost a person. She turned from the window. "I need you to understand something before you start making decisions. I'm listening. Whatever you're planning to do about Kyung-tae, whatever your instinct is telling you to do in the next 12 hours, you need to stop and think about it first. I always think before I act. You think very fast and then you act, which is not the same thing." She met his eyes directly. "If you pull him in tonight, if you make this about power and punishment, you will get exactly the performance he thinks you want. You will get a version of events designed to protect him from whatever he thinks you're going to do to him." Jae-hwan was quiet. 12 years, she said. "That's how long he's been watching you. He knows how you move. He knows what you reach for when you're angry." She looked at him with something that was not pity and was not impatience. It was something more honest than either of those, more direct, more uncomfortable. "The trap in that building was designed around your most predictable response." "And what is my most predictable response?" "Fear," she said. "Not yours. Theirs. Everyone around you is so afraid of disappointing you that they'll say whatever keeps them safe. You've built something that runs on obedience, and you've confused obedience for loyalty your entire career." The car moved through the city. The heater ran. Sung-won in the front kept his eyes on the road. "You could have led with information about the flash drive instead of sitting in that building for 12 hours, Jae-hwan said. "I tried to lead with it," she said. "Kyung-tae found me before I could." "When you say it was Kyung-tae, the service account alone was enough to point in his direction," she said. "But the flash drive has more than the service account. There's a payment trail, and there's a communication thread, and there's something else." She paused. "The manipulation of your schedule didn't start 6 weeks ago." "How long?" "Based on the access logs I was able to pull before I was grabbed, at least 14 months. He looked at her. "Kyung-tae didn't have that level of access 14 months ago," she said. "Someone else opened the door for him." She held his gaze. "Someone who has had access to your deepest systems for a very long time." The car crossed the river. Chicago moved around them, indifferent and enormous, and lit against the November dark. Jae-hwan did not say anything for a long time. Zuri pulled the thermal blanket tighter and looked out the window again, and the expression on her face was not triumph at having delivered the information. It was something quieter and more complicated. The look of a person who has uncovered something they wished they hadn't had to uncover, who has carried it alone for as long as they could, and who is only now, finally, setting it down. He would not learn the rest of what was on that flash drive tonight. He would not learn who else had opened the door. Tonight he would get Zuri somewhere safe, and he would sit with what he already knew, and he would begin the very slow, very difficult process of understanding how badly he had miscalculated. The shape of it was already there, already forming. The outline of a betrayal that did not start with Kyung-tae and was not going to end cleanly. Outside, the city continued being the city, enormous, indifferent, full of the kinds of people who build things and the kinds of people who wait for those things to be built before deciding whether to dismantle them. Kwon Jae-hwan sat in the back of his armored car 12 hours too late and already thinking, and the woman he had walked into a trap to find sat 2 feet away from him and said nothing more. That silence was its own kind of information. He filed it away for later. They took her to the safe house on Winthrop Avenue, not to any of his primary residences, because Jae-hwan understood immediately that if Kyung-tae had been moving pieces for 14 months, then the geometry of what was compromised was larger than he could map in one night. Safe houses were safer than home, when home itself might be a known coordinate. The Winthrop property was a 3-flat in Edgewater that appeared from the outside to be a slightly run-down rental building and was from the inside a fortified, climate-controlled, fully equipped operational space that Seung-won had maintained under a shell company since 2019. 3 bedrooms, a medical kit that could handle most non-surgical emergencies, a secure communications room, and a kitchen stocked on a rotation that meant nothing in it was ever more than 2 weeks old. Zuri looked at it when they brought her in and said, "You keep a doctor on call, or am I improvising?" Dr. Sung-won said, 15 minutes. Good, she said. Then she sat down at the kitchen table, still wrapped in the thermal blanket, and she put her good hand flat on the surface of the table like she was checking that it was real. Jae-hwan watched that from across the room and did not comment on it. The doctor, a compact, unhurried Korean-American woman named Park, who had been on Seung-won's medical retainer for 6 years, and who asked no questions that were not clinically necessary, arrived in 11 minutes, examined Zuri's shoulder, and delivered her verdict with the economy of someone who had been doing this long enough to skip the softening. Partial separation, a C-joint. Not a full tear, but close. You need ice, a sling, and you need to stop using it like it's fine. She looked at Zuri over the edge of her glasses. It is not fine. I know it's not fine, Zuri said. Is it going to get worse if I don't rest it tonight? Going to get worse anyway. The question is whether you make it significantly worse, doctor. Park began assembling a sling from her kit. How long were you in that position? Arms behind you? Approximately 12 hours. Park didn't react to that. Just kept working. The soft tissue damage is consistent with that timeline. You'll have significant swelling by morning. Ice every 2 hours. Take the anti-inflammatory I'm leaving. She paused. And sleep if you can. Zuri said, Sure. Park looked at her with the expression of someone who knew what sure meant when a person said it like that. She finished the sling, left a small bag of supplies on the table, nodded at Seung-won, and was gone in under 4 minutes total. Jae-hwan had not moved from his position near the doorway the entire time. Zuri looked at him now. You're hovering. I'm standing. You're standing in a way that constitutes hovering. He moved to the chair across the table from her and sat down. Better. More honest. He was watching her, and she knew he was watching her, and they could both stop performing otherwise. The flash drive, he said. I'll tell Seung-won the location in the morning. Sending anyone out tonight risks drawing attention to where it's hidden. Where is it hidden? I'll tell Seung-won in the morning. He looked at her. She looked back. This was not defiance for the sake of defiance, he understood that much. This was operational discipline from a woman who had spent 12 hours alone in a room working out exactly what she was going to say, and to whom and in what order. You don't trust the room, he said. I don't trust anything I can't verify tonight, she said. That includes this building's sweep status, the communications protocols your team ran before we arrived, and whether anyone in your organization beyond Sungwon has access to this location. Reasonable, correct, and faintly devastating, the way correct things are when they reveal how far the contamination has spread. Sungwon swept the building before we brought you in, Jae-hwan said. I believe that, she said. I also believe that Kyung-tae had 14 months and a level of access that I haven't fully mapped yet. I'm not questioning Sungwon's competence. I'm questioning whether any of us knows the full radius of the compromise. Jae-hwan was quiet. Get some sleep, she said. You look like you've been awake for 2 days. 31 hours. That's almost 2 days. I'm fine. She looked at him with an expression that was not quite pity and not quite exasperation, but lived somewhere in the neighborhood of both. You always say that. It's always true. It is never true, she said. But okay. She pushed back from the table carefully, favoring her right side, and stood. I need 6 hours. If anything changes with Kyung-tae's location, wake me. Zuri, she stopped. He didn't have a sentence ready. He had the beginning of one. Something about the 12 hours. Something about what she had managed alone in that room. Something that, in a different version of himself, he might have been able to say without it costing him anything visible. Instead, what came out was the shoulder. Use the ice. She looked at him for a moment. Something passed across her face that she didn't elaborate on. I know how ice works, she said. Then she went down the hall, and he heard the door close, and he sat at the kitchen table in the empty room and thought about 14 months. Sungwon came in from the communication room at 1:15 in the morning and poured himself coffee he did not drink and stood at the counter with his back to the room. Talk, Jae-hwan said. Kyung-tae is at the Lakeshore property. His car hasn't moved since 11 p.m. Sungwon set the cup down. He doesn't know yet how it went. He's waiting. For what? Depends on what the plan was. If the plan was an ambush and the ambush worked, he's waiting for confirmation. If it didn't work, Sungwon turned around. He's waiting to see which version of this he has to manage. Jae-hwan thought about Kyung-tae sitting in the Lakeshore property, which was a secondary residence Jae-hwan had allowed him to use during a renovation dispute 3 years ago, and which Kyung-tae had apparently never entirely vacated. Thought about what a man waits for when the thing he set in motion might have gone wrong. He knew I would come for her, Jae-hwan said. Everyone knew, Sungwon said. Flat. Not cruel. Just accurate in the way Sungwon was always accurate. That was the point. Jae-hwan stood up and went to the window. The street below was empty, wet, the pavement reflecting the orange of the sodium lights. She said the access logs go back 14 months. Kyung-tae's clearance level 14 months ago. He didn't have the access, Sungwon said. Not at that depth. Not without someone giving him a layer he wasn't authorized for. Someone inside has to be. They both sat with that. The shape of it was becoming clearer, and Jae-hwan did not like the shape. The shape required him to consider a category of person he had not been willing to consider, not a lieutenant, not a mid-level operator, but someone with a different kind of standing. Someone whose access to his systems was so fundamental it had never required justification. I need the full access log, Jae-hwan said. Everything. Above lieutenant level authorization from 14 months to 8 months ago. Who touched what? I can have it by morning. Have it in 3 hours. Sungwon nodded. He picked up his coffee, still didn't drink it, and moved toward the communications room. Then he stopped. There's something else. Jae-hwan waited. The Meridian Tower property. The LLC that holds it. Sungwon kept his back to the room. I ran the registration chain tonight while you were with the doctor. 3 shell companies, 2 state registrations, 1 offshore layer. He paused. The original holding entity was established in 2018. The registered agent is a law firm that handles incorporation work for 6 of our legitimate real estate interests. The room was very quiet. That firm, Jae-hwan said. Tae-sung brought them on, Sungwon said. In 2017, when we were restructuring the commercial portfolio. Jae-hwan did not move. He stood at the window with the wet street below and the sodium lights and the weight of what Sungwon had just said pressing against something in his chest that he had been refusing to examine since the car ride back from the river. His uncle, The man who had attended his father's funeral and taken a 17-year-old who didn't know what to do with grief and had given him direction and structure and a vision of what power could look like. Who had spent 24 years positioned as the elder whose approval Jae-hwan sought without realizing he was seeking it. Who had chosen that building. Who had access to the law firm. Who had, it was becoming clear, been building this specific trap, not for weeks but for a very long time. Go pull the log, Jae-hwan said. Sung-won went. At 4 in the morning, Zuri appeared in the kitchen doorway, in the clothes she had arrived in, minus the coat, her arm in the sling, her eyes carrying the particular quality of someone who had managed perhaps 90 minutes of actual sleep and had stopped pretending the rest was coming. Jae-hwan was at the table with the access log Sung-won had delivered at 3:40. Printed, because he thought better from paper than from screens, which was a preference Zuri had never once mocked before, despite mocking him for several other things. She looked at the papers on the table, at him, at the papers again. You found something, she said. Sit down. She sat down across from him, favoring her right side, and he turned 3 of the pages toward her. She read. He watched her face while she read, and saw the moment she arrived at the same conclusion, he had saw her expression do something that wasn't quite shock, because the shape of it had already been implicit in what she'd told him in the car, but something that was the feeling of an implicit thing becoming explicit. The feeling of a suspicion being confirmed. Taesung, she said. The LLC traces to a firm he controls. The access elevation that predates Kyung-tae's involvement came through a service account that connects to a system integration he personally commissioned in 2021. Jae-hwan turned another page toward her. He told me it was a security upgrade. It was, she said. It was an upgrade that also created a back door, one he gave to Kyung-tae when he needed a visible hand. She was quiet for a moment. He's been planning this since 2021. Maybe longer. The 2021 integration gave him access. The 14 months of log manipulation is what Kyung-tae used once he had it. But the original architecture was Taesung's, she finished. She sat with that for a long moment. He wanted you to destroy Kyung-tae. He wanted me to destroy everything. Jae-hwan's voice was controlled. So controlled that the control itself was audible, the specific flatness of a man keeping something down by force. Kyung-tae was the instrument. Ambush me, provoke retaliation, create enough visible chaos that the organization tears itself apart while I'm in the middle of it. But Kyung-tae failed, she said, because I found the credential breach before the trap was set. And because you didn't run, he said. You ran toward the documentation instead of away from the situation. I ran toward the documentation and then got grabbed in a parking garage, so let's not overstate the heroism. You kept the flash drive out of his hands. She looked at him levelly. Jae-hwan, your uncle has been engineering your destruction for at minimum 3 years. The documentation matters, but right now I need you to tell me what you're planning to do about Kyung-tae, because whatever it is, it's going to determine whether we have a case or whether we have a body and no case. The shift in her from the early morning quiet to this direct and operational, and refusing to let the weight of what they'd discovered become an excuse for delay, was something he'd seen in her before. The capacity to hold grief and function simultaneously. It was not coldness. It was a different kind of discipline. I want him in a room, Jae-hwan said. I know you want him in a room. He kidnapped you, I know what he did. Her voice was sharp. Not angry at Jae-hwan, but sharp the way a person gets when they need to cut through something fast. I was there. I have the shoulder to prove it. And I am telling you that if you bring him in on anger, you will get a performance. He's been inside your operation for 12 years. He knows exactly what version of events will minimize his exposure and maximize yours. Jae-hwan's jaw was tight. You're asking me to offer him something. I'm asking you to think about what you actually need from him. She leaned forward slightly, careful of the shoulder. You need the full chain. You need everything that connects Taesung to the access logs, to the building, to the kidnapping. Kyung-tae is the only person who can give you that with enough specificity to be actionable. And if he decides he'd rather take what's coming to him than cooperate, then we work with what the flash drive has, which is substantial but not complete. She sat back. But if you give him a reason to cooperate, legal protection, a structured agreement, something that makes cooperation more survivable than silence, he'll talk. He's not a man with a code. He's a man who made a calculation and got to the point where the calculation stopped paying off. Jae-hwan looked at her for a long moment. You've been planning this conversation since the car. I've been planning this conversation since approximately hour 3 in that building, she said. I had time to think. He looked away, out the window, where the sky was beginning to lose its pure darkness and move toward the gray that preceded morning. He thought about Kwon Tae in the lakeshore property, waiting. He thought about 12 years of proximity and the specific calibration of trust that built up over 12 years. The way you stopped checking certain assumptions because you'd checked them so many times that the checking felt like an insult. He thought about his uncle. He thought about being 17 and the shape that grief takes when it's handed structure, and how indistinguishable mentorship and ownership can be when you're too young and too raw to tell the difference. Legal protection, he said. That means lawyers. It means lawyers. It means this goes somewhere I can't fully control. It means, she said carefully, that you handle Tae-sung through channels that don't require you to become what he expected you to become. He looked at her, and what did he expect me to become? The version of you that burns everything down when someone touches what matters to him. She held his gaze. He was counting on that version. He spent 3 years engineering a situation designed to produce that version. The room was quiet. The coffee maker on the counter had finished its cycle and was keeping the pot warm with a low, steady sound. If I offer Kwon Tae cooperation terms, Jae-hwan said, it comes through attorneys. Nothing verbal that isn't documented. Agreed. And I'm in the room when he talks. Considered that. Sung-won should be there. You should be behind glass. No. He needs to feel like it's a safe space to confess, not a tribunal's. I need to hear it directly, Jae-hwan said. Not through glass. Not through a recording. I need to be in the room. She looked at him for a moment. Why? Because 12 years, he said. And I want to know what his face looks like when he explains it. That landed in the space between them and stayed there. She didn't argue further. There was something in it that was not about strategy, and they both knew it, and she did not try to remove it from him, which was its own form of respect. Okay, she said. You're in the room. Sung-won reached Kwon Tae at 6:47 in the morning by phone. He did not tell him what had happened at the Meridian Tower. He did not indicate whether the ambush had worked or failed. He said only, Jae-hwan wants a meeting. Winthrop location. 9 a.m. There was a pause on the other end that lasted approximately 4 seconds, which was 1 second too long for a man who had nothing to hide. All right, Kwon Tae said. He at 8:53. Jae-hwan knew this because Sung-won texted him from the surveillance position outside. He also knew that Kwon Tae had driven himself, which meant either that he was maintaining the performance of normality or that he had not yet made a decision about whether to run. Probably both. A man in Kwon Tae's position at this particular hour was a man still running the odds, still believing that there was a version of this conversation he could manage his way through. He had been managing conversations with Jae-hwan for 12 years. He thought he knew the architecture of them. He walked into the kitchen of the Winthrop property at 8:58 and found Jae-hwan sitting at the table with 2 attorneys he had never met, and Sung-won standing by the far wall with his arms at his sides. No weapons visible, no raised voices, no theater of intimidation. And Zuri Ellington sitting across from the empty chair, her arm in a sling, her lip still split at the corner, looking at Kwon Tae with an expression so completely devoid of anything dramatic that it was, in its own way, the most frightening thing in the room. Kwon Tae stopped in the doorway. He was 53 years old, lean, with the particular kind of composure that comes from years of operating in environments where composure is a survival skill. He wore it well. He wore it right up until the moment he saw Zuri's face, and the sling and the split understood, in one glance, that the arithmetic of the previous night had gone somewhere other than where he'd expected. Sit down, Kwon Tae, Jae-hwan said. His voice was even. Measured. Not the voice of a man who was burying rage, the voice of a man who had made a decision about rage and set it aside because he had found something more useful. Kyung Tae sat down. One of the attorneys, a woman in her 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the demeanor of someone who had been in rooms like this before and found them professionally interesting, opened a folder and turned it to face Kyung Tae. These are the terms of a cooperation agreement. You'll want to read them before anyone in this room says anything further. Kyung Tae looked at the folder, looked at Jae-hwan, looked at Zuri. Read it, Jae-hwan said, still even. Take your time. Kyung Tae read it. He read it carefully, which told Jae-hwan that he was actually reading it and not performing the reading, which told him that some part of Kyung Tae's calculus was genuinely considering the offer rather than dismissing it. That was useful. That was the wedge. The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of pages turning. Outside, a garbage truck made its way down Winthrop Avenue, the mechanical grind of it loud and ordinary and indifferent to everything happening inside this building. Kyung Tae reached the last page. He set the folder down. He looked at the table for a moment, a long moment, the kind that has a decision inside it, and then he looked at Jae-hwan directly, which was the first time since he'd walked in that he'd held that eye contact. How much do you know, he said. Jae-hwan said, nothing. Let the silence work, the access logs, Kyung Tae said. Not a question, a calculation being made aloud. The LLC registration, another beat. She found the clerk. I found the credential breach, Zuri said. Her voice was completely flat. The LLC came later. Kyung Tae's eyes moved to her face, to the split on her lip, to the sling. Something shifted in his expression that was not quite guilt, but was adjacent to it, the involuntary response of a man who had told himself that what he'd ordered was operational and was now sitting. Cross from the operation in a sling with a split lip. The flash drive, Jae-hwan said. We have it. That was not entirely true, yet the drive was still in its hiding place, and Zuri had not yet directed anyone to retrieve it. But Kyung Tae did not know what was on it, did not know how much Zuri had managed to document before he grabbed her, and the uncertainty was doing exactly what Jae-hwan needed it to do. Kyung Tae's hands were flat on the table. He was very still. The person who approached me, he said finally. Jae-hwan waited. He said it was about succession, Kyung Tae said. He said Jae-hwan was becoming, he stopped, adjusted. He said the organization needed a transition, that Jae-hwan had lost perspective. About what, Zuri said. Kyung Tae looked at her with the expression of a man who had not expected her to be the one asking. About what mattered. About discipline. He said that Jae-hwan was letting personal. He paused again, choosing words. Personal attachments compromise operational judgment. The room was very still. He was talking about me, Zuri said. It was not a question. Yes, Kyung Tae said. Jae-hwan's hands on the table did not move. His expression did not change. The attorney with the gray hair made a small note without looking up. He told me that Jae-hwan's attachment to you was a structural weakness, Kyung Tae said. That it had been noted by people inside and outside the organization. That it was only a matter of time before someone used it against him. He looked at the table. He was right about that part. He was right about it, Jae-hwan said, because he arranged for it to be used. Kyung Tae didn't answer immediately. He used you to use her to use me, Jae-hwan said. That's what you're describing. I didn't know the full shape of it when I agreed, Kyung Tae said. I thought it was a power transition. I thought he wanted control of the organization. He doesn't want the organization, Zuri said. Both men looked at her. She was looking at Kyung Tae with that same flat, deliberate attention. He wants Jae-hwan to destroy it. He's never wanted to run it. He wants to watch Jae-hwan tear it apart from the inside because Jae-hwan won't stop being Jae-hwan long enough to realize he's been handed the match. She paused. That's what the ambush was designed to produce. Not a transfer of power. A detonation. Kyung Tae was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, something in his voice had shifted, not softer, exactly, but less armored. Splitting. The voice of a man who had been carrying a weight that had turned out to be different from the weight he thought he'd picked up. He said the woman would be safe, he said. He said it was about the optics. That Jae-hwan coming for her in the building would be photographed, documented, and used to demonstrate that he was operating on emotion rather than judgment. That was what I understood the trap to be. He looked at Zuri's lip. I told my men she wasn't to be touched. And yet, Zuri said, the man who grabbed her in the garage, he said. He wasn't following my instructions. Whose instructions was he following? Sung-won said from the wall. The first thing he'd said since Kyung-tae walked in. The silence that followed. That question had a specific quality. Kyung-tae's hands shifted on the table, just slightly. But Jae-hwan had spent 20 years reading the body language of men who deciding how much to say. And what Kyung-tae's hand said was, I know the answer and I'm deciding whether giving it is more survivable than withholding it. He looked at the cooperation agreement still open in front of him. Sign it first, the attorney with gray hair said quietly. Then talk. Kyung-tae picked up the pen. He hesitated for exactly 3 seconds. Then he signed. The man in the garage, he said. I didn't send him. He was Taesung's placement. Someone Taesung embedded in my team 8 months ago. He set the pen down. I thought he was my man. He wasn't. A mole inside a mole, Sung-won said. Taesung wasn't going to leave the operation in my hands, Kyung-tae said. I understood that the moment she came back alive. If the ambush had worked, if Jae-hwan had walked into that room, and the trigger had gone off, I wasn't going to be the one who benefited. He looked at Jae-hwan for the first time, with something that might have been, underneath everything else, a form of humiliated honesty. He was using me the same way he was using her, a visible hand. Something to point to. I was the explanation. Jae-hwan looked at the man who had sat at his conference table for 12 years. Looked at him for a long moment without expression. Then he said very quietly, tell me everything he told you. From the beginning. Don't skip anything because you think it protects you. The agreement protects you. The truth is what activates the agreement. Kyung-tae nodded once and began. It took 4 hours. 4 hours of Kyung-tae going backward through the architecture of a conspiracy that had been built around Jae-hwan's specific psychology so precisely that it required knowing him from the inside. Knowing what he'd defend. Knowing what he'd pursue without stopping to think. Knowing, above all, that the one thing capable of overriding Jae-hwan's discipline was not money, not power, not threat, but the idea of someone under his protection being taken. Taesung had known that. He had known it because he had watched Jae-hwan for 24 years. And because he had, and this was the part that settled in Jae-hwan's chest, like something physical he had been, the one who first taught Jae-hwan that attachment was a liability. Had spent years cultivating in his nephew the belief that caring about specific people made a man predictable and predictable men were vulnerable men. Had built the architecture of Jae-hwan's emotional isolation as deliberately as he had built the access backdoor in 2021. Taesung had engineered the man, and then had engineered the trap around the man he'd engineered. The irony, the specific merciless irony, was that his calculation was correct. Jae-hwan's attachment to Zuri was real, was visible, was the kind of thing that moved through an organization as information, even when nothing was said explicitly. But Taesung had drawn the wrong conclusion from it. He had seen attachment and diagnosed weakness. He had not considered the possibility that what Zuri had been doing for 3 years, challenging Jae-hwan, refusing his control, insisting on her own judgment, had been slowly, imperfectly, rewriting something in him. He had not considered that the attachment might have made Jae-hwan not weaker, but different. By noon, Kyung-tae had given them enough to build a case. Financial records, communication threads, the identity of Taesung's placement in Kyung-tae's team, the location of accounts. Enough that the attorney with gray hair was already on her phone with a second attorney before Kyung-tae had finished his last cup of coffee. Zuri had listened to all 4 hours without speaking. Now she stood carefully and walked to the window and looked at the street outside and said nothing for a while. Jae-hwan came to stand beside her. Not close enough to be touching. Just beside her. He's at the lakeside estate, Jae-hwan said. I know, she said. I want to call him. She didn't answer right away. She was watching something on the street below, a woman pushing a stroller, moving at the ordinary pace of a person whose Thursday morning contained none of this. If you call him angry, she said, He hears the man he made. I'm not going to call him angry. She turned to look at him, looking for the truth of that in his face, in the specific tension around his jaw and eyes that she had learned to read over 3 years, because reading Jae-hwan was a necessary survival skill in their working relationship. She found something in his face that was not anger. It was worse than anger. It was the cold, settled clarity of a man who had arrived at a decision that couldn't be unmade. Okay, she said. He thinks he knows what I'll do, Jae-hwan said. He built me to do it. Then show him he built something that outgrew the blueprint, she said. He looked at her, then looked back at the street, then said quietly, with a steadiness that had nothing performed about it, the man he embedded in Kwon Tae's team. The one who grabbed you in the garage. What about him? He's still out there. She absorbed that without flinching. Then finding him is the first thing. Sung-won's already on it. Then what are you waiting for? He was quiet for a moment. I'm waiting, he said, to be sure that what I'm about to do next is my decision and not his. She held that for a moment. Outside, the woman with the stroller turned the corner and disappeared. It's your decision, Zuri said. I'm watching you make it. He nodded once. Then he went to find Sung-won, and the morning moved into afternoon. And somewhere north of the city, Kwon Tae-sung sat at his lakeside estate and waited for the call he was certain was coming. Certain he knew what it would sound like. Certain he knew the voice that would be on the other end of it. He was right about the call. He was wrong about everything else. Sung-won found the man from the parking garage at 2:17 in the afternoon. His name was Lim Dong-hyun, 38 years old, former private security contractor, embedded in Kwon Tae's team 8 months ago under a cover identity that had been constructed well enough to pass a standard background verification, but not well enough to survive the kind of targeted pull. Sung-won ran when he had a specific thread to follow. The cover identity had a social security number, an employment history, 2 references, all of it real enough on the surface, all of it hollow underneath. Sung-won laid the file on the kitchen table at Winthrop and did not editorialize. Jae-hwan looked at the photograph. A compact man with a forgettable face and the particular kind of stillness that develops in people who have spent years in operational positions where stillness is a professional asset. Where is he now? Jae-hwan said. Wicker Park, an apartment registered to the same shell structure as the Meridian Tower LLC. Sung-won paused. He hasn't moved since this morning. He may not know yet how last night resolved. Or he knows and he's waiting for instructions, Zuri said from across the table. Both men looked at her. She was holding her coffee with her left hand, the right arm still in the sling, and she was looking at the photograph with an expression that was controlled in the way that things are controlled when the alternative is not controlled at all. He grabbed me from behind, she said, not to anyone in particular. Just a statement of fact delivered to the room. He had my phone blocked before I reached my car, which means he was monitoring my signal, which means he had access to a level of technical infrastructure that a standard private security contractor doesn't carry. She looked up at Sung-won. Who built that infrastructure? Tae-sung's people, Sung-won said. Which means Lim wasn't operating independently, she said. He was a direct line. Not a mole inside Kwon Tae's team of feed. He was reporting directly to Tae-sung the entire time. Jae-hwan was very still. Everything Kwon Tae discussed internally, Zuri said. Every adjustment to the plan. Every complication. Tae-sung had a live feed through Lim. She set her coffee down carefully. He knew when I found the credential breach. That's why Lim was in position so fast. Kwon Tae didn't send him. Tae-sung did, the moment Lim reported that I was getting close. The kitchen was quiet. Through the window, the afternoon light was the flat, colorless gray of a Chicago November that had decided it was done pretending to be anything other than winter. Bring him in, Jae-hwan said. There's a complication, Sung-won said. Jae-hwan waited. Lim moved 40 minutes ago. He's no longer at the Wicker Park apartment. Sung-won's voice carried the particular quality of a man delivering information he would have preferred not to deliver. His phone went dark. His car is still parked outside the building. He left on foot. He ran, Jae-hwan said. Or someone pulled him, Zuri said. The distinction mattered. A man who runs makes decisions based on self-preservation. A man who is pulled is being managed by someone who anticipated this moment and had an extraction ready. Jae-hwan looked at Sung-won. Tae-sung knows Kyung-tae cooperated. Has to, someone said. Lim was his feed. The moment Lim went dark, Tae-sung pulled him, which means Tae-sung made a decision this morning, probably within the first 2 hours after he stopped receiving reports from the building. He knows the ambush failed, Jae-hwan said. He knows Kyung-tae is talking. He's moving. He stood up from the table. How much time do we have before he makes his next move? That depends on what his next move is, Zuri said. Jae-hwan looked at her. If he panics, he runs, she said. If he's the man you've described for 24 years, if he's the man who built this across 3 years without a single detectable error, he doesn't panic. He adapts. She looked at Sung-won. What does his estate look like right now? Vehicles. Personnel. Sung-won pulled out his phone and typed a short message. Response came back in under a minute. He read it and his face did something small that Jae-hwan recognized as the face Sung-won made when the news was bad. 4 vehicles on the property this morning, Sung-won said. 2 remaining now. He's already moving assets, Jae-hwan said. He's been moving since before noon, Sung-won said. We just didn't know to look. Call to Tae-sung happened at 3 p.m. in the communications room of the Winthrop property because that room was the most secure space in the building and because Jae-hwan wanted walls around the conversation. Sung-won sat to one side with a recording device. Zuri stood in the doorway, which was as close as she could get, without being in Jae-hwan's line of sight, which was where she'd chosen to position herself deliberately close enough to hear, removed enough not to pull his attention. Tae-sung answered on the second ring. That was the first thing. He answered on the second ring, which meant he had been waiting for the call, which meant he was ready for it, which meant whatever Jae-hwan had intended to walk into this conversation with as an advantage was already partially surrendered. Jae-hwan, his voice was warm. That was the second thing, the warmth in it, genuine sounding, the specific warmth of a man who had been performing affection. For so many years it had become indistinguishable from the real thing. I've been worried. I heard there was an incident last night. Jae-hwan said, I know about the building. A pause. Shorter than a breath. What building? The Meridian Tower. The LLC. The law firm you brought in 2017. The service account integration in 2021. Jae-hwan's voice was level. Precisely level. The way a surface is level when someone has taken care to make it that way. I know the access log. I know about Lim. I know what Kyung-tae told us this morning. The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds. When Tae-sung spoke again, the warmth was still there, but it had moved from the warmth of affection to the warmth of something else, something more deliberate. I think you're under significant stress right now, and I think someone has been feeding you information that. He signed a cooperation agreement, Jae-hwan said. His attorneys and mine were in the room. He gave us 4 hours. We have the financial threads, the communication records, the identity of the man you embedded in his team. Another silence. Jae-hwan. The warmth was gone now. What replaced it was something Jae-hwan had heard before in his uncle's voice, but had never correctly identified the precision of a man who has always known exactly how much of himself to reveal and is now making a real-time calculation about whether that approach still applies. You are going to make a very serious mistake if you pursue this. I'm going to make several decisions, Jae-hwan said. None of them are mistakes. You don't have the full picture. Then tell me the part I'm missing. A pause then. Not on a phone. You're not going to get a room, Jae-hwan said. What I have to tell you, Tae-sung said, is not something you'll want recorded. It's not something that belongs in an attorney's folder. Something between the two of us. His voice dropped slightly, became something more intimate and more dangerous at the same time. About your father. The room went completely still. Jae-hwan did not move. His expression did not change. But something in the air of the room changed, a pressure shift, the way the atmosphere changes before something that hasn't happened yet, but is about to. What about my father? Jae-hwan said. In person, Tae-sung said. Come to the estate. Alone. A beat. Bring the woman if you want. I understand you'll want her where you can see her. But come to the estate, and I will tell you the thing about your father that I have not told you in 24 years, and then you will understand why I did what I did." The line was quiet. "You have until tonight," Tae-sung said. "After tonight, I won't be in a position to tell you anything." He hung up. Jae-hwan sat in the communications room for 30 seconds after the call ended. Just sat there, with the phone on the table in front of him, and 30 seconds of the particular silence that follows a conversation that has rearranged something. Then Zuri walked in from the doorway. She had heard all of it. She sat down across from him without asking permission and looked at him directly. "Don't go," she said. "He knows something about my father." "He knows that you want to know something about your father," she said. "Those are not the same thing." He looked at her. "He just had the entire architecture of his plan collapse in the span of 12 hours, she said. "He lost Kyung Tae. He lost Lim. He knows we have documentation. The only move he has left is to get you to his estate alone, away from attorneys and recording devices and the cooperation agreement, and have a conversation he can control." She leaned forward. "Whatever he says about your father true, false, partial, manufactured is designed to produce a specific reaction in you. That's the only thing it's designed to do." Jae-hwan was quiet. "Your father has been dead for 24 years, she said. And then, more quietly, "I'm sorry, but he has. Whatever Tae-sung knows about him is something Tae-sung has been holding for 24 years and choosing to deploy right now, in this moment when he has nothing else. That is not revelation. That is ammunition." He looked at the phone on the table. He looked at it the way a man looks at a thing he wants to pick up and knows he shouldn't. "He raised me," he said. "I know, after my father died. He was there the next day. He was there every day for 2 years while I figured out how to—" He stopped. "That's real. Whatever else is true, that part is real." "Yes," she said, "it is. And it's also the thing he's been banking on for 24 years. The thing he knew he could use when everything else failed." She held his gaze. "He didn't love you like a father, Jae-hwan. He invested in you like an asset, and he's calling in the return." The words hit somewhere unprotected. He didn't show it in his face, but she had spent 3 years learning to read him past his face, and she saw it in the specific way he stopped blinking for a moment. "I'm not saying he felt nothing," she said softer. "People can love you and use you simultaneously. It's one of the more miserable facts about human beings. But right now he's using you, and he's using your father to do it. And if you go to that estate, you are walking into the same trap you walked into last night. Different room, same architecture." Sungwon from the doorway, "She's right." Jae-hwan did not answer immediately. The thing about Jae-hwan, the thing that Zuri had understood about him from the first month of working together, was that his silences were not empty. They were occupied. He was doing something in the silence. Running something, weighing something, and interrupting the silence was the same as interrupting the work. So she didn't interrupt it. She sat across from him and let him work. He was in the silence for almost a full minute. Then he picked up the phone. He did not call Tae-sung. He called the attorney with the gray hair. "I need a federal contact," he said. "Someone in the organized crime division. Someone who will move fast." He listened. "Tonight if possible. Tomorrow morning at the latest." He listened again. "Yes, I'm certain." He hung up. Zuri let out a breath she had been holding without realizing she was holding it. "He'll still have the conversation about my father," Jae-hwan said. "Just not the one he planned." She looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means that whatever he knows or says he knows, he can say it to a federal prosecutor with a recorder running." He stood up. "Let it be in the record. Let it be in the record where it can be examined. If it's true, I'll deal with it. If it's manufactured, there it is." He walked toward the door, stopped, turned back. "You were right," he said. "About the trap, about the architecture." He said it simply, without embellishment, the way he said things when he meant them, without wanting to make a production of meaning them. "You've been right about most of it." She held that for a moment. "I've been right about all of it." Something shifted in his expression that was not quite a smile, but was the structural relative of one. "Don't push it." He left the room. The federal contact the attorney produced was a woman named Special Agent Diane Marchetti, 44 years old, Organized Crime Division, who arrived at the Winthrop property at 6:15 in the evening in a dark blue sedan that she parked 2 blocks away and walked from, which Jae-hwan noted and respected. She came with one colleague and a very specific kind of energy, not the aggressive energy of an agent who wanted to use the moment to build a case against Jae-hwan, but the focused energy of an agent who had been working the periphery of the Kwon organization for 3 years and had just been handed something she had not expected to be handed. She sat at the kitchen table with the cooperation agreement documents, the access logs, the financial threads from Kwon Tae's deposition, and the LLC registration chain, and she read for 45 minutes without asking a single question. Her colleague took notes. Jae-hwan sat at the far end of the table and did not perform patience but managed it. Zuri sat to one side and watched. Marchetti read with the attention of someone cataloging what the agent's face did at each specific document. Face reading as operational intelligence. 3 years working for Kwon Jae-hwan had made her very good at it. What Marchetti's face did at the LLC registration chain was the most interesting thing it did. It did something small and controlled that Zuri recognized as the face of a person who has just found the piece that connects something they already had. When Marchetti finished, she stacked the documents evenly, which was a behavior that indicated she was a person who organized her thinking through her physical environment. The service account integration, she said. The 2021 system upgrade. She looked at Jae-hwan. We have a related thread from a different investigation. I'm not going to tell you what investigation. She paused. I'm going to tell you that what you've given me tonight connects to something we've been building for 18 months. And that connection means this becomes a federal matter faster than you probably anticipated. How fast? Jae-hwan said. Custody of Kwon Tae-sung, she said. I can have a warrant by tomorrow morning if my supervisor agrees tonight, which I believe he will. But that requires Tae-sung to be at a known location tomorrow morning. He's at his lakeside estate north of the city, Sung-won said, as of the phone call this afternoon. If he runs tonight, Marchetti began. He won't run tonight, Jae-hwan said. He's waiting for me to come to him. He believes I'm going to come to the estate. He paused. He'll wait. Marchetti looked at him. How certain are you? Certain enough to stake the warrant on it. She studied him for a moment, with the particular attention of someone deciding how much operational trust to extend. Then she looked at Zuri. You're the one who found the credential breach. Yes, and the flash drive. Where is it? I'll retrieve it tonight, Zuri said. It'll be in your hands by 8 a.m. Marchetti nodded once. Then we proceed. She began gathering documents. I'll need you both available tomorrow. Questions will happen fast once the warrant issues. Understood, Jae-hwan said. Marchetti and her colleague left the kitchen. Sung-won walked them out. The door closed. Zuri and Jae-hwan were alone in the kitchen. She looked at the table where the documents had been. At the cleared surface. At the ring from Marchi's coffee cup on the wood. He's going to invoke your father tomorrow, she said. Whatever he has. Whatever he's been sitting on, he'll say it during the arrest or after. He'll find a way to say it where you'll hear it. Jae-hwan looked at the table. I know. Are you ready for that? He was quiet for a moment. I don't know what he has. Does it matter? He looked at her. Whatever he says about your father, she said. Whatever version of him Tae-sung offers, does it change what your father was to you? Jae-hwan was still. No. Then it's just information, she said. Painful, probably. Designed to destabilize. But just information. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully decode, something in it that was older than the current situation. Something that had to do with the specific kind of alone that a man who has been performing strength for 24 years carries inside the performance. You're doing it again, he said. Doing what? The thing where you say the precise right thing in a way that makes it sound like you're not trying to. I'm not trying to, she said. I'm just thinking out loud. You never think out loud, he said. You always know what you're going to say before you say it. She considered that. Maybe I've been spending too much time around you. Something in his face settled, not quite relief, not quite warmth, but something in that general territory that he did not name and she did not push. The flash drive, he said. Tonight, I'll take Sung-won. I'll come. You don't need to. I'll come, he said again. Flat, final, the way he said things when the decision was already made and the conversation was procedural. She looked at him. Okay. The flash drive was in a library on North Clark Street, not hidden in the building itself, but in a specific book on the third shelf of the southwest section, a book that Zuri had slid it behind on her way out of the library at 4:15 on Wednesday afternoon, 40 minutes before Kyung-tae's man had her phone blocked, and 20 minutes before she'd reached the parking garage. She had gone to the library specifically because libraries had cameras at the entrance and the exits but not in the stacks, and because she had chosen a book, a thick, unremarkable architectural history of Chicago that had not been checked out in 3 years based on the date's stamp that no one would have reason to touch. A hiding place so specific it was invisible. They drove to the library at 8:30 in the evening. Sungwon went in first. Jae-hwan went in second. Zuri went in third, on Sungwon's signal, and walked directly to the southwest section of the third floor without appearing to hurry, which was harder than it sounds when the thing you're retrieving has been sitting unprotected for 30 hours, and the entire case rests on it being where you left it. It was where she'd left it. She slid it out from behind the architectural history with her left hand, closed her fingers around it, held it for a moment, just long enough to register the physical reality of it, and then slipped it into her jacket pocket. She walked out of the stacks and found Jae-hwan waiting at the end of the aisle, hands in his coat pockets, looking at the shelf beside him without reading the titles. Got it, she said quietly. He looked at her, then at her jacket pocket, then at her face. Good, he said. They left the library the way they'd come in, separately, at intervals, which was how you left places when you were being careful, and got back into the car, and the drive back to Winthrop was quiet, in the way that evenings get quiet when the immediate crisis has subsided enough to let the tiredness through. Zuri looked out the window at the city. She had been in this city for 11 years. She had built a career in it. She had built a reputation in it, competent, reliable, the woman who could manage any situation. She had taken a job 3 years ago that half her professional network had told her was a mistake, working for a man who would either respect her or make her invisible, and she had decided before she walked into the interview that she would not be made invisible regardless of which way it went. She had not in those 11 years been grabbed from behind in a parking garage and spent 12 hours in a chair in an abandoned building above a river. She had not been the object of a conspiracy. She had not sat in a kitchen at 4 a.m. reading cooperation agreements and access logs while a federal kidnapping charge was being built around the events of a night. She had survived, mostly, by keeping very still. She had also not, in those 11 years, sat in a car beside a man who had walked into a building he knew was a trap because she was inside it, and felt whatever she was currently feeling about that fact. She hadn't named it. She wasn't going to name it tonight, but it was there. The shoulder, Jae-hwan said without looking at her. It's fine. It's not fine, Park said. I know what Park said. She looked at her own reflection in the car window. I took the anti-inflammatory. It's manageable. That's not the same as fine. No, she said. It's not. They rode in silence for a moment. After tomorrow, she said. After the warrant, after the arrest, after whatever Tae-sung says when they come for him, what happens to the organization? He was quiet. There's going to be a question about your role in all of it, she said. Marchetti is strategic, but she's not offering you immunity out of generosity. She wants the organization dismantled cleanly. She wants cooperation that builds her case and doesn't give her a second case to manage. I know what she wants. Do you know what you're willing to give her? Another silence, longer. Everything above board I keep, he said. Logistics, real estate, security contracting. All of it clean, all of it legitimate, all of it under whatever compliance structure she wants to build around it. He paused. The rest, the accounts, the connections, the parts that don't survive sunlight I hand over. All of it. Zuri looked at him. That's most of the power. Yes, the power your uncle spent 3 years trying to destroy. He was going to get it anyway, Jae-hwan said, one way or another. Either he destroyed it through me or the federal investigation eventually caught up with the parts that couldn't survive sunlight. He looked out the windshield. The difference is whether I'm in a cell when it happens or behind a desk. And you're certain. I've been certain for about 4 hours, he said. Since Marchetti told me she had a connecting thread from a different investigation. He paused. The writing was already on the wall. I just couldn't see the wall until last night. She looked at him for a moment, at the profile of him in the moving dark of the car window. The specific quality of stillness he carried that she had spent 3 years cataloging and still couldn't fully account for whether it was discipline or damage or some combination of the two that had calcified into something he'd stopped distinguishing. He was going to tell you something about your father, she said. Tonight on the phone, he pulled back. He's saving it. Whatever it is, he said. I've been managing without knowing it for 24 years. One more night won't break anything. She looked back out her window. The city moved past, lit windows, dark streets, the ordinary ongoing life of people who had not spent the last 30 hours in the architecture of a conspiracy. You should sleep, she said. So should you. I'm going to, she said. As soon as I make a copy of the flash drive. I'll do it, she said. I know exactly what's on it and in what order. If we need to walk Marchetti through it in the morning, I should be the one who knows the structure. He didn't argue. He recognized the particular quality of her firmness, the kind that wasn't about assertion but about competence, about a person who knew what they were good at and did not apologize for being the best person for a specific task. They got back to Winthrop at 9:15. Zuri went to the communications room to copy the drive. Sungwon Wan ran a final check on the surveillance position outside the estate, confirming Tae-sung's remaining vehicles were still on the property. Jae-hwan sat in the kitchen with a glass of water. He didn't drink and thought about his father. His father had been a methodical man, quiet. The kind of man who repaired things around the house on Sunday mornings, who explained his reasoning when he made decisions, who had died on a Tuesday alone in his car in a parking lot because his heart had simply stopped. At 53, without warning or drama or the chance to say anything to anyone. Jae-hwan had been 17. He had gotten the call from his mother, who had gotten the call from a hospital, and he remembered standing in the kitchen of their house, holding the phone after the call ended, and the specific texture of the silence in that kitchen, how it had not felt like silence, but like the absence of something that had been there so long he hadn't known it was sound. Tae-sung had arrived the next day, had sat beside him at the kitchen table and said very little and been simply present in a way that had felt, at 17, like the most generous thing one person could do for another. Whatever Tae-sung was going to say about his father, Jae-hwan had no way to prepare for it. He could not armor himself against information he didn't have. He could only decide in advance that the information would land in a place that didn't move the things it was designed to move. He was still deciding that at 11 p.m. when Sung-won came into the kitchen with his phone out and his face doing the thing that meant the news was bad. Ta-sung, Sungwon said. Jae-hwan looked up. He left the estate 40 minutes ago, Sungwon said. All remaining vehicles are gone. Surveillance team lost him on a county road north of the city. He turned off his phone. He paused. He didn't wait. Jae-hwan was very still. He knew, he said. Either he knew or he decided the risk was too high regardless. Sung-won lowered the phone. Either way, he ran. Zuri appeared in the kitchen doorway, the flash drive in her hand, having clearly heard from the hallway. She looked at Jae-hwan. He looked at her. The kitchen held the weight of the thing that had just happened, the warrant that would issue in the morning, for a man who was no longer where the warrant expected him to be. Call Marchetti, Zuri said. Yes, Jae-hwan said. Now, not in the morning. Now, she walked fully into the kitchen. If he's running, every hour matters. She needs to know tonight. Jae-hwan picked up his phone, and in the same moment, it rang. Not Marchetti's number, not Sung-won's secondary line, not any number he recognized. He looked at the screen. Unknown caller. The kind of unknown caller that is not a mistake or a wrong number, but a deliberate construction. He answered. Tae-sung's voice came through immediately, unhurried, carrying none of the compressed panic of a man who had just abandoned his estate. You chose the federal route, he said. I thought you would. Jae-hwan said nothing. That's not a criticism, Tae-sung said. She got to you. I underestimated how far she'd gotten to you. A pause, just long enough. I want you to know something, Jae-hwan. Something about what I did and why I did it. Not the story you have from Kyung Tae, which is incomplete. The real reason. Where are you? Jae-hwan said. Somewhere comfortable. Somewhere I planned for. Another pause. Your father knew what I was. He knew it when you were 9 years old. He knew the kind of operation I was running alongside his legitimate business, and he made a choice to say nothing, because saying something would have meant losing me as a partner. And losing me as a partner would have meant losing the backing that kept his business afloat. His voice was still even, still warm, still carrying that specific intimacy that Jae-hwan had spent 24 years receiving as love. I did not corrupt your father. Your father was a practical man who made a practical decision. He chose to not know what he knew. The kitchen was absolutely silent. He would not have been ashamed of you, Jae-hwan, Tae-sung said. Because he was not the man you remember. He was a man who looked away from things that required courage to look at. And you became what you became because you decided at 17 to look at everything. Jae-hwan's hand was very still on the phone. I didn't try to destroy you, Tae-sung said. I tried to destroy the thing you became. The organization. The power. Because I built it with you and I watched it become something I could no longer control. And I am an old man who does not accept things he cannot control. Another pause. Longer. That's all it was. There's no larger architecture. No grand betrayal. Just an old man and his particular flaw. You had her tied to a chair, Jae-hwan said. His voice was very flat. The flatness of something that has been pressed down with great force. Yes, Tae-sung said simply. You put a man in a garage who grabbed her from behind and put a gun to her skull and drove her to an abandoned building and left her alone for 12 hours. Yes. And you're telling me this was not a betrayal. I'm telling you it was, Tae-sung said. I'm telling you it was, and I'm telling you why. Because you deserve to understand the why, even if the why doesn't excuse it. A pause. The woman. What you feel for her, I want you to know that I saw it clearly. Clearer than you did. And I was afraid of it. Not because it made you weak, but because it made you unpredictable to me. And I realized I had spent 24 years building someone I could predict. And then a woman spent 3 years working next to you and undid more of that than I could tolerate. He stopped. Then she's good for you. That's the thing that made her dangerous to me. I want you to know I understand that now. The line went dead. Jae-hwan stood in the kitchen with the phone in his hand and the silence of the dead call around him and something in his face that Zuri, watching from across the table, had never seen there before. Not grief exactly, not rage exactly. Something that didn't have a clean name. The specific expression of a person just had the architecture of 24 years explained to them in 4 minutes by the architect. He set the phone down. He looked at the table. He's not coming back, Sungwon said quietly. No, Jae-hwan said. Marchetti still needs to know tonight. Yes. Neither of them moved for a moment. The kitchen held the weight of it, the call, the confession, the specific kind of damage that information does when it arrives too late to change anything and too completely to ignore. Zuri walked to the table and sat down across from him and said nothing. She did not offer comfort in the conventional sense because she understood, without being told, that what he needed right now was not comfort but presence. The simple fact of someone in the room who was not performing anything. She sat there. He sat there. After a long moment, he looked up at her. He said, "You undid things," he said. "In 24 years, he built something. You undid it in 3. She held his gaze. What did I undo? He thought about it. Genuinely thought, not as a performance of consideration, but as the real thing, a man examining what had shifted in him and trying to name it accurately. Part, he said slowly, that believed isolation was the same as safety. She looked at him for a long time. That's not nothing, she said finally. No, he said. It's not. Outside, somewhere north of the city, Kwon Tae-sung was moving through the dark toward wherever he had planned to go, carrying a confession he had already delivered and a secret about a dead man that he had used, in the end, not as a weapon, but as something stranger in explanation. The old man's attempt at a final honesty in the wreckage of a final failure. Inside, in a kitchen on Winthrop Avenue, Jae-hwan picked up his phone and called Marchetti. And everything that came next was going to require him to be a different kind of man than the one his uncle had built. He was already becoming it. He had been becoming it for 3 years, one argument at a time, one refused instruction at a time, one moment of genuine honesty at a time, in the company of the one person in his life who had never once pretended he was finished. Marchetti answered on the first ring. That was the thing about federal agents, who were close to something. They stopped sleeping in the normal way and started existing in a state of managed alertness where a ringing phone at 11:30 p.m. was not an interruption but an expected data point. She answered on the first ring and said nothing, just waited, which told Jae-hwan she had been expecting this call and had already decided not to waste words on preamble. He ran, Jae-hwan said, left the estate within the last 2 hours. Surveillance lost him on a county road north of the city. A beat. How long ago did your team lose visual? 40 minutes. Maybe 45. Did he contact you? After he left. Unknown number. 4 minutes. Recorded yes. She was quiet for 3 seconds, which was the sound of a federal agent recalculating a timeline. I need that recording tonight. I need your surveillance team's last visual confirmation, the county road location, and anything your team has on secondary properties or contact networks that could indicate destination. A pause. And I need to know if anyone in your organization has a vehicle or a contact that could be used to track him that I don't currently know about. Jae-hwan looked at Sung-won across the kitchen. Sung-won was already moving, already pulling his secondary phone, so already running the kind of parallel operation that 9 years of working beside Jae-hwan had made into reflex. I'll have everything to you in 30 minutes, Jae-hwan said. 20, Marchetti said. He's already got a head start. She hung up. Zuri was looking at him from across the table. She had heard Marchetti's side clearly enough. Secondary properties, she said. Does Tae-sung have anything that isn't in the documentation we gave her? Jae-hwan thought. It was a specific kind of thinking, going backward through 24 years of proximity, through hundreds of conversations, through the texture of a relationship that had been simultaneously genuine and constructed, trying to identify the seams where the construction showed. The places where Tae-sung had mentioned things in passing, casually, the way a man mentions things he doesn't think will ever matter. There's a property in Wisconsin, he said. Not in his name. Not in any like I know of. He mentioned it once. Maybe 8 years ago, a friend's cabin he used during hunting season. He said it like it was nothing. Did he give a location? Lake Geneva area. He said it was on the water. He looked at Sung-won. It's something that's thin, Sung-won said. Everything we have right now is thin. Give it to Marchetti. Sung-won was already dialing. The next 4 hours were the kind of 4 hours that expand and compress simultaneously, each individual minute feeling both endless and consumed before it fully registered. Jae-hwan and Sung-won worked the kitchen table like a command post, feeding information to Marchetti's team in real time. Vehicle descriptions, the Wisconsin property lead. The name of a contact Tae-sung had used for private travel arrangements 6 years ago that Sung-won dug out of an archived correspondence log at 12:40 a.m. Names, numbers, threads, everything. Zuri sat at the corner of the table and managed the flash drive documentation, building a navigable index of every item on the drive so that when Marchetti's team needed to cross-reference a specific financial record or access log timestamp, they wouldn't have to hunt through raw files. She worked with her left hand, the sling on her right, her face carrying the concentrated stillness of someone who has chosen a specific task as the alternative to thinking about everything surrounding the task. At 1:15 in the morning, Marchetti called back. The Wisconsin property, she said. We found a registration. Not in his name, but connected to a contact name your team provided the travel arranger. We have a judge on the phone. We'll have a warrant for that property within the hour. You think he went there, Jae-hwan said. I think he had a plan and he stuck to it, she said. Men who operate the way your uncle operates don't improvise destinations at 70 years old. He had somewhere ready. This is the only somewhere we can find. A pause. I'm moving a team north now. They'll be in position before the warrant clears. What do you need from me? Stay where you are, she said. If he contacts you again, record it and call me within 60 seconds. Don't respond to anything he says in a way that suggests you're cooperating with us if he thinks you've gone federal. He may move again before we reach the property. He already knows, Jae-hwan said. He said it on the call. He chose the federal route. That's what he said. A silence. He knew. He knew before he ran. Another silence, longer. Then he ran knowing we'd come for him, which means either the Wisconsin property is not where he's going or she stopped. Or he's not trying to escape, Jae-hwan said. The kitchen was very quiet. He's 69 years old, Marchetti said. He has a heart condition. It's in his medical records, the ones his attorney filed with an insurance dispute 2 years ago. His cardiologist is at Northwestern. She paused. A man in his position, his age, his health running is one option. What's the other option? Jae-hwan understood what she was asking and what she wasn't saying directly. He's not going to do that, he said. He said it with a certainty that he was not entirely sure was true, and Marchetti heard the uncertainty in it. You need to be prepared for multiple outcomes, she said. I'll call you when we have visual on the property. She hung up. Zuri was looking at him. He did not look back immediately. He looked at the table, at the ring from the coffee cup, at the spread of documents that represented the dismantling of something that had taken 24 years to build. He's not going to do that, he said again to the table. You don't know what he's going to do, Zuri said quietly. Not unkindly, just accurately. I know him. You knew the version of him he wanted you to know. He looked up at her. The specific bluntness of that not cruel, but refusing to let him have a comfort that wasn't founded in anything real, was something he had learned, over 3 years, to recognize as the truest form of respect she knew how to offer. You're right, he said. I know, she said. Then drink some water. You've been running on nothing for 2 days. I'm fine. You keep saying that. It keeps being approximately true. Approximately is not the same as actually. He stood up, went to the counter, filled a glass from the tap, and drank it standing there, looking at the dark window above the sink. The street outside was empty. The city was doing its late-night thing, not silent. Chicago was never silent, but reduced the way a theater sounds when the audience has thinned and the performance is still happening for the ones who's stayed. At 2:40 a.m., Marchetti's team reached the Wisconsin property. Called Jae-hwan from outside the perimeter, which meant she was close enough to the building to need to speak quietly. There's a light on, she said. Ground floor, southwest side. One vehicle in the drive, registered to the travel contact under a rental arrangement. We're going in. I want to know immediately, Jae-hwan said. You'll hear from me, she said. The next 18 minutes were the longest 18 minutes of the night. Sungwon Shun stood by the window with his arms crossed and said nothing. Zuri had stopped working on the document index and was sitting with her hands flat on the table, both of them, the slung arm and the free one, palms down on the wood, in the specific posture of a person who is holding themselves in place by deliberate physical contact with a surface. Jae-won stood in the middle of the kitchen and did not pace, because pacing was a performance of anxiety and he refused it, but he was very aware of every second. His phone rang at 2:58. We have him, Marchetti said. He was in the building. He's in custody. A pause. He didn't resist. Jae-hwan closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. His condition, he said. Fine, physically fine. He was sitting at a table when we came in. There was a glass of water in front of him and a coat on the chair behind him like he'd just arrived and hadn't decided yet whether to stay. Another pause. He asked if you were coming. Jae-won said nothing. I told him you weren't, she said. He said he figured. A beat. He asked me to tell you that the cabinet in his study at the estate, the one behind the painting, the combination is your birthday. Kitchen was very still. He said you'd know what's in it, Marchetti said. And that it belongs to you. The line went quiet for a moment. Then we're transporting him now. Federal processing will start at 6 a.m. I need you at the federal building at 8. Both of you, you and Ms. Ellington. Your attorneys should be there. We'll be there, Jae-hwan said. She hung up. He lowered the phone. Sungwon looked at him. Cabinet. I know what's in it, Jae-hwan said. He said it quietly. The way a man says something he has known and not known simultaneously for a very long time. Documents. From before. From when my father was still alive. He looked at the window. Things Tae-sung held. Things about the early years of the organization, my father's involvement. Things that could have been used at any point. He paused. He's returning them. As what? Sung-won said. A gesture. As a confession, Zuri said. Both men looked at her. Confessed on the phone tonight, she said. Everything he said to Jae-hwan, he knew the call was recorded. He knew we'd give the recording to Marchetti. He said what he said knowing it was going into the federal record. She looked at Jae-hwan. And now he's returning documents that incriminate himself further. He's not fighting it. He's building the case against himself. Why, Sung-won said. She looked at Jae-hwan. Because he wants you to get a clean exit, she said. If the full picture of the early years becomes evidence, and he's the one who provided it, his culpability is complete, and yours is separate. Your father's is sealed. She paused. He's protecting the exit. He couldn't let himself protect any other way. Kitchen held that. Jae-hwan said nothing for a long time. He stood there with his phone in his hand, and the weight of it, all of it, the 24 years, the architecture of a relationship that had been both real and weaponized. The specific grief of discovering that the person who raised you after your father died had also carried, in his pocket, the means to destroy you, and had ultimately chosen not to use it, completely sat in his chest, like a stone, he couldn't put down and couldn't carry forever. Okay, he said finally. One word. Carrying approximately 24 years of insufficient vocabulary for what needed to be said. Okay, Zuri echoed quietly. They slept in 3-hour intervals, which was not sleep so much as the body overriding the mind through sheer biological insistence. Jae-hwan sat in the communications room chair and was unconscious for 2 hours and 40 minutes before his own internal alarm, the one that had no snooze function, that had been calibrated over 15 years of operational necessity, brought him back at 5:15. He washed his face, put on the same shirt because there was no other option, drank coffee that Sung-won had made at some point in the early morning, strong enough to qualify as a tactical decision. Zuri appeared at 5:40, also in the same clothes, hair pulled back simply, the sling readjusted. She looked like a woman who had slept 3 hours after being held hostage for 12 and had decided that was sufficient, which was the look of someone who had made a negotiated peace with what the available options were. She poured coffee without speaking, drank it standing at the counter. The federal building at 8, he said. I know, she said. Marchetti will have questions about the credential breach in detail. Technical sequence. How you traced it. I know that too. The attorneys will want to prep you before Jae-hwan. She set her cup down. I've been in difficult rooms before. I know how to answer questions. He stopped. She looked at him. You're doing the thing where you brief people on things they already know because it makes you feel useful. He looked at her for a moment. Is that what I'm doing? Yes. She picked up her cup again. It's a management flaw. You've had it for at least 3 years. You've never mentioned it. I'm mentioning it now. He looked at the counter. Something in his face shifted, not dramatically. Nothing about Jae-hwan was dramatic in the visible sense, but the shift was there. A fraction of something loosening. How many other management flaws have you been cataloging? Several, she said. I have a document. He looked at her sharply. I'm joking, she said mostly. The federal building at 8 a.m. was the institutional version of the 4 hours of documentation work they'd done at the kitchen table, bureaucratic, procedurally relentless, fluorescent lit in a way that was specifically hostile to people who hadn't slept properly. Marchetti ran the session with a team of 4 prosecutors and 2 agents, and they moved through the material with the focused velocity of people who had been building toward this and were not going to let momentum dissipate. Zuri walked them through the credential breach with the precise sequential clarity of someone who had already organized the information for exactly this kind of delivery. She explained the access log discrepancy, the traced entry point, the timing pattern, the relay, the service account. She explained the archived message. She explained the flash drive contents in the order she'd indexed them the previous night. She answered follow-up questions without hesitating, without embellishing, without performing anything. Marchetti watched her with the specific attention of someone recalibrating an assessment. Jae-hwan sat to one side through most of it, answering when addressed, providing organizational context when the prosecutors needed it, and watching Zuri do the thing she did. The thing that had made her indispensable, not because she was loyal, but because she was capable in a way that was structural, load-bearing, the kind of competent that holds a situation together without asking credit for doing it. At 10:30, Marchetti took Jae-hwan into a separate room. Just the two of them and the gray-haired attorney who had been present since the cooperation agreement. Marchetti laid a single document on the table. "Your cooperation structure," she said. "What you're providing, what you're keeping, what you're divesting, and the timeline. My team and your attorney worked the framework overnight." He read it. It took 11 minutes because he read carefully, the way he did everything. Not rushing, because the appearance of speed was not more valuable than the reality of comprehension. It was largely what he had told Zuri in the car. Legitimate operations intact. Criminal adjacent accounts and connections surrendered. Compliance framework installed. Oversight mechanism with reporting requirements. An independent board for the logistics and real estate operations, with 2 seats designated for external appointment. The document had one addition he had not expected. He read it twice. "The executive director position," he said. Marchetti nodded. "It came from your attorney's team based on existing organizational structure. An independent executive director of operations and compliance with authority to escalate directly to the oversight board, bypassing you if necessary." She paused. It was framed as part of the compliance architecture. "We agreed it strengthens the accountability structure." He looked at the document. "You need someone in that seat who has already demonstrated they'll challenge your decisions," Marchetti said. "That's not a soft requirement. It's structural. The oversight board won't function if the internal escalation point is someone you've appointed for loyalty." He was quiet. "Your attorney suggested someone already in your organization," Marchetti said. "Someone with demonstrated history of independent judgment." A pause. "I assume you know who they meant." He set the document down. Looked at the table. Looked at the window, which faced a courtyard full of bare November trees. "She doesn't know about this," he said. "It would be her choice to accept," Marchetti said. "The position would be included in the settlement structure, but the offer would be hers to take or decline." He looked back at the document. At the specific line, Executive Director of Operations and Compliance, Independent Authority, Direct Board Escalation, Irrevocable Appointment Term of 3 years. Irrevocable. Even he couldn't remove her from it once it was in place. His attorney, he realized, understood him better than he'd credited. "I'll sign," he said. They left the federal building at 12:40 p.m. into a Thursday afternoon that had the cold, clear quality of a Chicago day that has decided to be honest about what season it is. No pretense of warmth. Just the direct, specific cold of late November, the sky a flat pale blue, the wind off the lake carrying the smell of water and winter. Zuri walked beside him to the car. Sung-won was ahead, having pulled it around, moving with the economical purpose of a man who had not slept enough and was operating on professionalism alone. She had her coat closed with her left hand, the slined arm against her body, and she was looking at the street rather than at him. "It's done," she said. "Not a question. The structure is in place," he said. Taesung will be processed today. Formal charges by end of week. The cooperation agreement activates Kyung Tae's testimony. The financial records and flash drive documentation go into federal evidence. He paused. It will take months to fully resolve, but the shape of it is set. She nodded, still looking at the street. "There's something else," he said. She looked at him. "The settlement structure includes a new position in the organization. Executive Director of Operations and Compliance." He looked at the car, at Sung-won holding the door, at everything that was not her face. "Independent authority. You can escalate anything to anyone, bypassing me if you believe it's necessary. 3-year irrevocable term." He paused. "The position was included at my attorney's recommendation. As a compliance requirement." She was very still. "I want to be clear," he said. It's a real position with real authority, not a title. Not something I can undo when it becomes inconvenient. He looked at her now. It's also something you can decline. If you decide you want to leave the organization, entirely leave Chicago, leave all of it, there's a separate document that provides a full year's salary and a non-disclosure that protects you rather than protecting me. She held his gaze for a long moment. You had your attorney put this together overnight, she said. Yes. While you were also feeding information to a federal agent and running down a fugitive. Sung-won handled most of the fugitive portion. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully decode, which was unusual. 3 years of reading him had made her generally legible to him, but what was in her face right now was layered in a way that required more information than he had. I'm not going to answer you right now, she said. I know, I need time to think. I know that too. Don't do the thing where you interpret whatever I do in the next 72 hours as an answer before I've given you one. I'll do my best. That's not reassuring. No, he said. It's honest. She looked at him for another moment. Then she got in the car. The estate north of the city was unlocked. When Sung-won's team arrived that afternoon, Tae-sung had left it unlocked, a deliberate act, as if inviting an inventory of what he'd left behind. The team moved through it systematically while Jae-hwan waited in a car at the end of the drive, not going inside. Not yet ready to be inside, a space that held the physical residue of 24 years of a relationship he was still in the process of understanding at its correct dimensions. Sung-won called from inside the study at 3:15. Cabinet, he said. Behind the painting. Combination worked. What's in it? A pause as Sung-won looked. Documents. Older paper, some of it looks like it's from the 90s. Photographs and a sealed envelope. Another pause. The envelope has your name on it, his handwriting. Jae-won sat in the car and looked at the estate through the windshield. A substantial building, stone and wood, the kind of property that announced its owner's arrival in the world without shouting it. He had been inside it hundreds of times, had sat at the table in that kitchen and eaten meals, had stood at that window and looked at that lake and received in that building more advice about power and control and the architecture of loyalty than in any other single location in his life. All of it real and all of it compromised, and somehow mysteriously, simultaneously both. Bring the envelope to me, he said. Leave the rest for Marchetti's evidence team. Sun Sin-won came out of the building 2 minutes later and walked the gravel drive to the car and passed the envelope through the window without comment, which was the correct response to the situation and was why Sung-won had survived 9 years at Jae-won's side. The envelope was standard white letter-sized, sealed with a strip of tape that had been pressed down with some care. His name on the front in Tae-sung's handwriting, which was the handwriting of a man who had written by hand his entire life, and whose script had the confident irregularity of something practiced rather than taught. He opened it. Inside was a single page, handwritten both sides. He read it there, in the car, in the driveway of his uncle's estate, with the lake visible in the distance, and the November light doing its flat, honest thing. He read it twice. He folded it and put it in his coat pocket. He did not tell Sung-won what it said. He did not tell anyone what it said that day or the day after. What it said was between him and a man who was in federal processing and the ghost of a father who had been dead for 24 years, and who had apparently been, like most people, more complicated than the memory of him that a 17-year-old boy had built and maintained. What he did, after he folded the letter and put it away, was tell Sung-won to drive back to the city. At 5 p.m. he went to the safe house on Winthrop to change his shirt, which had been the same shirt for 36 hours, and which represented, in its current state, the full physical toll of those 36 hours. He stood in the small bathroom and looked at his face in the mirror for a moment, the specific face of a man who has been awake and operational for the better part of 2 days, which was not the same face as the face he wore in meetings, or the face he maintained in the corridors of his organization. It was just his face, tired and 41, and carrying the evidence of the last 2 days in the lines or in his eyes. He changed his shirt, went back to the kitchen. Zuri was at the table with her laptop, the left hand moving over the keyboard, the right arm still in the sling. She had changed too. Someone had arranged for a bag to be brought from her apartment, because that was the kind of operational detail Sung-won handled without being asked. She looked cleaner and still exhausted and was working on something with the focused energy of a person who has decided that stopping is not yet an option. He sat down across from her. She didn't look up immediately. Marchetti called while you were out. And? Tae-sung's formal statement has been entered. He didn't dispute any of it, the access, the planning, the building, the kidnapping. She paused. He entered a partial guilty plea to the kidnapping charge specifically. Said he wanted it on record separately. She looked up. He's 70 years old and he has a heart condition, and his attorney is probably already building a medical argument for sentencing mitigation. But the plea is there. Jae-hwan sat with that. There's something else, she said. Her voice had changed, slightly something in it, that was more careful than her normal register. Marchetti's team found the man from the garage, Lim. He was in Wisconsin too, not at the estate property, but at a motel nearby. He'd been there since early this morning. She looked at him steadily. He's in custody. He's talking. About the technical infrastructure. The phone blocking, the surveillance, the credential masking. She paused. And about a second operation. Jae-hwan was very still. He says Tae-sung had a contingency, she said. If the ambush at the Meridian Tower failed, if you survived it, and identified the source, there was a second plan. Not against you. Not against the organization. She held his gaze. Against me. The kitchen was absolutely silent. Specifically, he said. His voice was level. Precisely dangerously level. Compromising my professional history, she said. Lim had access to an external network people who build documented false narratives. Employment fraud allegations, financial misconduct claims. The kind of thing that gets filed with regulatory bodies and takes years to fully disprove, even when they're completely fabricated. She looked at the table. He was going to make me unemployable, make my name into a liability that anyone associated with me would want to distance themselves from. She said it very calmly, the calm of a person who has already moved through the first reaction to information and arrived at the managed version. But her hand on the keyboard had stopped moving. He had it ready, she said. The package, documents, false witness statements, fabricated records. Ready to deploy within 24 hours of the Meridian Tower operation. She looked up. Lim says it would have happened yesterday if the operation had gone differently. A pause. He says Tae-sung's specific instruction was, if the nephew survives and the woman survives, and they just destroy, make sure she doesn't survive it intact. Jae-hwan looked at her hand on the keyboard, the stillness in it. Is Marchetti containing it, he said. The package is in federal evidence. The external network is being rolled up as part of the broader conspiracy charges. She paused. Contained. Then it's done. The network, yes. The fact that it existed, she stopped. Restarted. Someone built a detailed false history of my professional misconduct and was prepared to release it. Not because I did anything, because I was useful to someone as a target. Her voice was steady. The steadiness cost something he could see it costing. I know it's contained. I know it didn't deploy. I also know that somewhere in a federal evidence room, there is a comprehensive document explaining all the ways my credibility could be destroyed. And that document exists because I worked next to you. Jae-hwan said nothing for a moment. Then I know. I'm not saying that she stopped. I'm not assigning blame. I'm saying it out loud because it needs to be said out loud, and I didn't have a place to put it until now. I know, he said again. She looked at him. Her jaw was tight, the specific tension of a person managing something that does not have a clean release point. You should have told someone what you were finding before you went to retrieve the evidence alone, he said. She blinked. Excuse me. The credential breach. When you found it, you had enough at that point to bring it to me directly, or to Sung-won. Instead, you spent 2 days building a case alone, without telling anyone. Her expression sharpened. I didn't know who to trust. The breach was using my credentials. Anyone in the organization could have assumed I was the source before I had documentation clearing myself. You could have trusted me. Could I, she said. I had a service account tied to Kyung Tae and an archived message that said your name, At that point, I didn't know how deep it went. For all I knew. For all you knew, I was involved. She held his gaze. Yes. The word landed flat and honest between them. He held it. He did not react to it the way a man with a fragile ego would react to it, with offense, with protest. He received it as information, which was what it was. Fair, he said. She looked at him. That's all you're going to say? What would you like me to say? I don't know, she said, and it was the most honest thing she'd said since she'd walked back into the kitchen and sat down. I don't know what I want from you right now, which is unusual for me. Yes, he said. It is. They looked at each other across the kitchen table. The fluorescent light above the sink had developed a slight flicker sometime during the previous 30 hours, and no one had fixed it. It flickered now. The city outside was doing its late afternoon thing, the shift from business day to evening, the quality of the light changing, the sound of the street changing. The position, she said. He waited. Executive director. Independent authority. 3-year irrevocable term. She was looking at the table. You said it was your attorney's recommendation. It was. Was it also what you wanted? He was quiet for a moment. Yes. Why? Because you're the only person in 12 years who has told me something I didn't want to hear without calculating, first, whether I would punish them for it. He said it simply, without ornament. Because the organization needs someone whose authority doesn't depend on my approval. And because he stopped, because she said, not pushing, just leaving the space open. Because giving you that position makes you harder to target, he said. Federal compliance officer with independent board authority is a significantly less useful leverage point than executive secretary who can be replaced. He paused. It protects you, and I'm aware that saying so makes it sound like I'm giving you the position as a security measure rather than because you've earned it and because you're the right person for it. Which is it, she said. Both, he said. It's both, and I refuse to untangle them because I think they're legitimately intertwined, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. She looked at him for a long time. I need more than 72 hours, she said. I know. I need to not be in a safe house when I make this decision. I need to be in my own apartment, sleeping in my own bed, without an arm in a sling, and the last 48 hours sitting on top of everything. Understood. And I need you to not do the thing where you act like the decision is already made and you're just waiting for me to catch up. He almost said, I would never do that. He stopped himself because she would have looked at him with the expression she reserved for statements that were technically deniable but observably false. I'll try, he said instead. She looked at him. Then she looked back at the laptop. My apartment building probably has someone watching it, she said. Tae-sung's people. Or people who were Tae-sung's people before this morning. Sung-won cleared it 2 hours ago, Jae-hwan said. She looked up. When did before you asked? I anticipated you'd want to go home, he paused. I didn't send anyone inside. Just cleared the external perimeter. Your space is your space. She looked at him for a moment with the expression she got when he did something that landed somewhere between exasperating and not. Okay, she said. I'll have a car take you. I can take a cab. Car is safer. The car also means one of your men sitting outside my building all night. One of Sung-won's men, on the public street, not inside the building, not visible from your windows. He met her eyes. 48 hours. After that, if you want to be left entirely alone, that's what happens. She weighed that then, fine, the car. She closed the laptop, stood up, careful of the shoulder, moving with a particular economy of someone managing discomfort without giving it more acknowledgement than it requires. At the doorway she stopped. The letter, she said. From the cabinet. He looked at her. You don't have to tell me what it said, she said. But I want to know if you're okay. He thought about the letter. About what it had said about his father, about Tae-sung, about the long, patient architecture of a man who had spent 24 years holding things he should have put down and putting down things he should have held. About the one paragraph at the end that had nothing to do with any of it and everything to do with all of it, which he was not going to be able to read again for a while because the first reading had used up whatever he had available for it. I'll be okay, he said. She looked at him for a moment. That's the first time you've said that with a future tense, she said. He thought about it. Yes, he said, it is. She held his gaze for one more moment, something passing across her face that she did not name, and he did not ask about, because some things in the space between two people are better received than decoded. Then she walked down the hall, and he heard her gathering her things, and he sat in the empty kitchen with the flickering light and the residue of 48 hours, and the specific, strange, unfamiliar feeling of a man who has just watched everything he built begin to become something different. Not destroyed, different. The difference between those two things, destruction and transformation, had cost him nearly everything he had. Outside the window, Chicago moved into evening, indifferent and enormous, full of people who would never know what had happened in their city over the last 2 days, full of lives running in parallel to this one, without awareness or intersection. And somewhere in a federal facility north of the city, a 70-year-old man who had spent a lifetime being the most patient person in every room he entered was sitting in a chair with a heart condition and a partial guilty plea. And if the letter meant what Jae-hwan believed, it meant something that might have been underneath everything, a form of relief. Carr would take Zuri home. Tomorrow, the work of becoming something different would begin in earnest. Tonight, Jae-hwan sat in the kitchen and waited for it, and for the first time in 15 years, he was not afraid of what came next. He was just ready for it. Zuri was gone for 11 days. Jae-hwan counted them the way a man counts things he has decided not to count, by noticing each morning that another one had passed. He did not call. He did not send someone to check the perimeter of her building. He did not manufacture reasons to contact her attorneys or route messages through channels that would give him information about her state of mind without technically violating what he'd promised. He had promised no surveillance, no retaliation, no men following her. He had meant it as a statement about her safety. He was discovering that it also meant sitting with the particular discomfort of genuinely not knowing, which was a discomfort he had spent 15 years engineering his life to avoid. The first 3 days were the hardest, not because he expected her back. He understood that she needed real time, not the theatrical version of time that some men offer and then undermine, but because the organization in her absence was suddenly visible in ways it hadn't been when she was present. Not visible in the operational sense. Visible in the sense that without her specific form of friction, things moved too smoothly. Agreements were reached too fast. No one pushed back on the Tuesday schedule he had built back to its old structure within 48 hours of her leaving. The junior coordinator who managed the desk in her absence said yes to everything. On the 4th day, Jae-hwan restructured the schedule himself and sent a memo to the senior staff explaining that going forward, any major operational decision required documented dissent from at least one member of the leadership team before approval. He did not explain why. He did not mention Zuri. He just changed the structure and watched the room try to adapt to a system that actively required people to disagree with him. It was uncomfortable for everyone, including him. That was probably the point. Sungwon read the memo and said nothing, which was his way of approving. The federal proceedings moved with the compressed, relentless momentum of a case that had significant agency investment and a cooperating witness and a defendant who had entered a partial guilty plea and was, according to Marchetti, not making the prosecutors' lives difficult. Tae-sung had a defense attorney, a good one, expensive, precise, but the attorney's job in the context of a partial guilty plea and extensive physical evidence was not to argue innocence. It was to argue for the most survivable outcome for a 70-year-old man with a documented heart condition. Jae-hwan met with Marchetti on day 2 and day 5. Both meetings were procedural additional documentation, clarification on organizational structure, the specific architecture of how the legitimate businesses would be separated from the surrendered assets. His attorneys were present. Marchetti's team was present. Everything was recorded and documented and placed into the building structure of a case that would take months to fully process through the courts. On day 5, Marchetti told him that Lim Dong-yoon had completed his cooperation statement and had been transferred to a federal facility outside the city. The external network he had used for the credential manipulation and the fabricated misconduct package had been identified and referred to a separate unit, 6 individuals connected to it had been arrested in 3 different states. She said this last part looking at Jae-hwan with the specific attention of someone delivering information they know will land in a particular way. The misconduct package, he said, in federal evidence. Not publicly accessible. The individuals who built it are facing separate charges. The package itself cannot be deployed or referenced outside of the evidentiary record. She paused. Ms. Ellington's professional record is clean and will remain clean. I know it's clean, he said. It was always clean. Yes, Marchetti said. I'm telling you that legally and formally it is protected. She paused again. She should know that. She knows. She should hear it officially. In writing, she slid a document across the table, a letter on federal letterhead, addressed to Zuri, formally documenting the evidentiary status of the fabricated material and the protections in place. If you're in contact with her, pass it along. He looked at the document. If I'm in contact with her. Marchetti looked at him with the expression of a federal agent who had been in enough rooms with enough people to know when 2 things were connected and was not going to pretend otherwise. Deliver it however you see fit, she said. He folded the document and put it in his jacket pocket. On day 7, Kyung-tae appeared before a federal magistrate for his cooperation agreement review. His attorney submitted the documentation of his full testimony, the financial records he had provided, the identification of Taesung's embedded operative, and the communication threads connecting the conspiracy. The magistrate reviewed the agreement terms and approved them. Jae-hwan was not present for this. He was told about it by his attorney in a phone call that took 4 minutes. He sat at his desk afterward and looked out the window at Chicago, which was doing what Chicago does in late November, being extremely itself, cold and gray and indifferent and massive, a city that has seen too much to be surprised by any of it. 12 years. He turned that number over in his mind. The way you turn over a stone that has been in the same place for so long, the ground beneath it has shaped itself around it. Kyung-tae had been in his organization for 12 years. Had eaten at his table, had stood at his shoulder through federal inquiries and organizational crises and the dozens of ordinary difficult days that accumulate over a decade of operating in the world Jae-hwan had built. And he had also, simultaneously, been something else. The thing Jae-hwan had been working toward understanding, not forgiving, not excusing, but understanding in the structural way, in the structureman who intends to rebuild something, must understand what caused the failure was that Kyung-tae's betrayal was not primarily about Kyung-tae. It was about the culture Jae-hwan had built. A culture so oriented around a fear of his disapproval that when a man with authority and access offered Kyung-tae an alternative, a way to matter in a different structure, he had taken it. Not because he was a monster, because he was a man who had spent 12 years performing loyalty without ever being genuinely asked whether he felt it. Jae-hwan had never asked. He had assumed. He had assumed because in the organization he built, assumption was the efficient option, and asking required a kind of vulnerability he had systematically trained himself out of. Zuri had told him this, in different words, sitting in the back of his armored car on the night he'd found her in the building. She'd told him that he had confused obedience for loyalty. He had registered it as a valid point. It had taken 7 days of her absence for him to understand it in his body, the way some things can only be understood when you're living inside the proof of them. He had built an organization around not needing to ask, around being the kind of man who provided, who decided, who structured, and who received compliance as a reasonable substitute for connection. It had cost him Kyung-tae. Eventually, it had nearly cost him everything. He opened his desk drawer and took out the letter from Taesung's cabinet. He had not reread it since the car in the estate driveway. He read it now, in the full afternoon light of his office, taking his time. His father had known, not everything. Taesung had been careful, had kept the criminal architecture separate from his legitimate partnership with Jae-hwan's father, but enough. He had known that his business partner operated in ways that did not survive scrutiny, and had made a decision over time to not scrutinize, to accept the stability that Taesung's backing and provided, and to build his life and his family inside that stability without examining its foundations too closely. It was not heroic. Taesung had not framed it as heroic in the letter. He had framed it accurately, a practical man making a practical calculation, the same way most people make the decisions they spend the rest of their lives not examining. The letter did not ask Jae-hwan to forgive his father. It asked in Tae-sung's precise, deliberate way for Jae-hwan to understand that the man he remembered methodical, quiet, Sunday mornings repairing things, the one who explained his reasoning, was real. Those things were real. They just coexisted with the other things, the way real people coexist with the compromises they've made. The last paragraph of the letter was the one that had cost him on first reading and cost him again now. I taught you that caring about people makes you vulnerable. I taught you this because I believed it. I was wrong. I was wrong for 30 years, and I did not understand I was wrong until I watched a woman spend 3 years making you better at being human without either of you knowing it was happening. That is the thing I could not control, not your organization, not your power, you the thing you were becoming. I could not control it, and I could not tolerate not being able to control it. That is the full truth. Everything else was architecture built around that truth. I am sorry for the architecture. I am not sure I can be sorry for the truth, which is that what I could not control turned out to be better than anything I built. He folded the letter, put it back in the drawer. He was going to be okay. He had told Zuri that, in the future tense, in the kitchen at Winthrop. He was discovering that okay was not a destination, but a practice, something you moved toward in increments imperfectly, on days when you had enough sleep and on days when you didn't. Today he had enough sleep. He had made himself sleep, the way he made himself eat and made himself think instead of react. He had a meeting in an hour with 2 attorneys and a compliance consultant about the structure of the new oversight board. He had a city to look at outside his window. He had the ordinary ongoing work of a man who has made a decision to become something and is discovering that the decision is only the beginning of the work. He went to the meeting. On the 9th day, Sung-won came into his office and set a small package on the desk without explanation. It was the flash drive. The federal evidence team had returned a copy to Zuri, per standard protocol, and Zuri had sent the copy to the office addressed to Jae-hwan. No note, just the drive, in a small padded envelope with her handwriting on the outside. Turned it over in his hands. Then he set it on the desk beside the lamp and left it there. On the 11th morning at 7:52, the private elevator opened. Jae-hwan was at his desk with a legal pad and 3 documents spread in the working pattern he used when he was thinking. Rather than deciding material arrayed at angles that allowed him to look at multiple things in sequence without shuffling. He heard the elevator before he saw the doors open. He did not look up immediately. He waited 2 seconds not as a performance, but because the 2 seconds were necessary to make sure that what he did next was governed by something steadier than the immediate reflex. Then he looked up. Zuri walked across the office with the specific gait of a woman who has had 11 days to make a decision, and has made it, and is walking across a room in the embodiment of that decision, neither hurrying nor dawdling, a pace that said, "This is deliberate." The sling was gone. She was moving her right arm with the careful economy of someone whose injury has not fully healed, but has healed enough to permit normal function if normal function is exercised with some attention. She was dressed the way she dressed well and precisely, the specific combination of competence and individual style that she had always maintained regardless of what was happening around her. She had her bag over her left shoulder. She set it on her desk, the one that had been occupied in her absence by the junior coordinator, who said yes to everything, and she looked at it for a moment, at the state of it, at the way it had been kept in the 11 days she was gone. Someone had maintained it exactly as she left it, the pens in their positions, the legal pad with the priority ranking she had written on her last normal morning, the reading glasses folded to the left of the monitor. Jae-hwan had told Sung-won on day 2 not to let anyone change the desk. She turned and looked at him across the office. He was still at his desk. He had set down the pen. "You kept the desk," she said. "You told someone to keep it." "Yes," she held his gaze. "That's the thing you just did, before asking me, deciding what I needed." He held her gaze back. "Yes." She looked at the desk, at the pen positions and the legal pad and the reading glasses. Then she looked at him again with the expression she got when she was working something out and had arrived at a conclusion that was more complicated than the premise she started with. "I'm going to let that one go," she said, "because the desk being exactly right is also the desk being there, which is what matters." He said nothing. She came into the office proper and sat down in the chair across from his desk, not her desk chair, but the chair clients used, the chair across from him. The one that indicated she was here as something other than the woman who managed his impossible schedule. She put her hands in her lap, looked at him directly. "I spent 11 days thinking about the position," she said, "and about other things, but mostly the position." "What did you decide?" "I'm going to tell you. But first I need you to answer me something honestly." "All right. The position," she said. "The independent authority, the 3-year irrevocable term, the direct board escalation. You said it was your attorney's recommendation and also what you wanted." She paused. "I want to know what it would cost you. Not abstractly. Specifically. What is the hardest part of that structure for you personally?" He considered the question. He considered giving her the version of the answer that was true but manageable. Then he considered that she had spent 3 years refusing the manageable version of things from him and would recognize it immediately. "The irrevocable term," he said. "Why?" "Because it means that if we seriously disagree, the kind that matters, I can't resolve it by removing the position." He paused. "I built everything I have on the ability to remove variables that became problems. You would not be a removable variable." She looked at him. "And that's hard for you. It's new," he said. "New things are difficult before they're familiar. You're telling me the hardest part of giving me genuine independent authority is that you can't take it back if you decide you don't like how I use it." "Yes. And you put it in the agreement anyway." "Yes." "Because," he said, "the point of the position is precisely that I can't take it back. If I can take it back whenever I want, it's not independent authority. It's authority I'm lending you contingent on your compliance, which is just a different version of the system that almost destroyed everything." He looked at the documents on his desk. "I've been building systems around compliance my entire career. I'm trying to build something else." She sat with that for a moment. The specific quiet of early morning in the office before the day's activity accumulated, the city visible through the windows in the flat gray light of a day that hadn't decided yet what kind of day it would be. "I accept the position," she said. He looked at her. "On one condition," she said. "What condition?" "You stop deciding what people need before you ask them." She held his gaze steadily. "Not just me. Everyone. You have a tendency to survey a situation, identify what you believe the correct outcome is, and arrange circumstances to produce that outcome without asking the people in the situation what they actually want. You've been doing it your whole career, and you're very good at it, and it's also a form of control that masquerades as care." She paused. "I'll be in that position, and I'll use that authority, and I'll escalate things to the board when I believe it's warranted. But I need you to be in a genuine process of changing that pattern. Not performing the change, actually working on it." He looked at her. "That's not something I can guarantee." "I know. I can't promise I'll always remember to ask before I arrange." "I know that too," she said. "I'm not asking for a guarantee. I'm asking for the genuine attempt." She paused. "Those are different things." He thought about the difference between them. Between the guarantee, which was a performance of certainty, and the genuine attempt, which was an honest acknowledgement that change was a process, and processes were imperfect, and the imperfection was not a reason to not begin. "The genuine attempt," he said. "Yes," she nodded once. Then she stood up, moved back to her desk, set down her bag in its specific position, and picked up the legal pad with the priority list she had written 11 days ago. She looked at it. This list is 11 days old. The Tuesday meeting was rescheduled to Thursday. The compliance consultant is coming at 2. Everything else is current. "Who rescheduled the Tuesday meeting?" "I did." She looked at him. "You restructured your own schedule. It was badly structured." "I know. I've been telling you that for 2 years." "You were telling me correctly." She looked at the legal pad for another moment. Then she set it down and picked up a pen and began writing a new one, the way she always did, top item first, ranked, precise, The handwriting of a person who had decided that the way you do small things is the way you do all things. He watched her for a moment. Then he looked back at his documents. They worked in the same room in the specific silence that develops between two people who have been working in the same space. Long enough that the silence is not empty, but full of the texture of two people, thinking, occasionally intersecting, occasionally pulling on the same thread from different angles. At 9:15, she set a document on his desk without comment. He looked at it. It was the draft framework for the new staff feedback protocol, the one he'd memoed on day 4, the one about requiring documented dissent. She had reviewed it and written notes in the margins, precise and direct, identifying 2 structural weaknesses and 1 gap in the escalation chain. He read the notes. She was right about all 3. "When did you draft this?" he said. "This morning, before I came in." "You reviewed it before you'd accepted the position." "I reviewed it before I'd told you I was accepting the position," she said. "I accepted it 9 days ago. I spent 2 days deciding whether to tell you." He looked up at her. She was not looking at him. She was looking at her legal pad, writing the next priority item. But there was something in the line of her jaw that was not quite a smile, and was also not nothing. 2 days, he said. "I needed to be sure I was accepting it for the right reasons." "And were you?" She looked up. "Yes." Kwon Jae-hwan's sentencing hearing took place on a gray Tuesday in February, 3 months after his arrest at the Wisconsin property. The courtroom was not dramatic in the way. Courtrooms are dramatic in films. It was institutional, fluorescent, the benches worn smooth by decades of people who had sat in them, waiting for the formal machinery of consequence to complete its work. Jae-hwan was present. He had not been required to be. His attorneys had advised him that his absence would be read as either indifference or continued animosity, neither of which served the narrative of a man who had cooperated with federal investigators and was demonstrably committed to the legitimate restructuring of his business interests. His presence would read as closure, which was what the federal proceedings needed to see from him. He was present because it was not false closure, and he knew it. He was present because Tae-sung was 70 years old and had a heart condition, and had, in the final accounting, chosen a particular kind of honesty that had made the case against himself complete and the exit route for Jae-hwan clean. He was present because the man who had sat beside a 17-year-old in a kitchen after a phone call that ended the world and said very little, and been simply there, that man had existed. He had also been other things. He had been both, simultaneously, for 24 years. Being present was the honest response to that complexity. Tae-sung was brought in by 2 federal marshals. He walked with a slight stiffness that had not been there the last time Jae-hwan had seen him in person, the compound stiffness of age and 3 months of federal detention, of a body that had been living in controlled institutional environments, when it was accustomed to estate grounds and lake water and the particular physical comfort of a man who had spent decades ensuring his own comfort. He sat at the defense table. His attorney sat beside him. Tae-sung looked at the room, at the judge, at the prosecutors, at the gallery briefly, and in the gallery he found Jae-hwan. They held eye contact for approximately 4 seconds. Tae-sung nodded once. A small nod, contained, carrying something that was neither apology nor defiance, but something more specific, the nod of a man who is acknowledging that the person across the room is there, that their presence means something, and that the meaning is too complex to reduce to a gesture, but a gesture is what is available. Jae-hwan returned it. Same nod, same economy. Then both of them looked at the front of the courtroom and the proceedings began. The sentencing took 2 hours and 40 minutes. Tae-sung's attorney presented the medical documentation, the partial guilty plea, the age, the absence of prior criminal record that was formally on record. The prosecutors presented the scope of the conspiracy, the financial evidence, Kyung Tae's testimony, the kidnapping charge. Tae-sung spoke once briefly when the judge invited a statement. He stood slowly, with the specific deliberateness of a man who has decided exactly is going to say and is not going to waste words. "I planned what I planned for reasons that seemed correct to me for a long time," he said. They were not correct. The woman who was put in that building deserved none of what was done to her. That is what I am most sorry for. Everything else I can explain. That I cannot. He sat down. The judge sentenced him to 7 years, with consideration for age and medical condition, in a federal medical facility. Parole eligible after 4. His legitimate assets were subject to partial forfeiture. The criminal network was formally dissolved. The gavel came down. Jae-hwan sat for a moment after the sound, sat with the specific feeling of something completing, not ending, because the completion of this particular thing was not the same as its ending. Tae-sung would serve time. He would be older when he came out. The 24 years would not be unmade. The letter in the desk drawer would not be unmade. None of it would be unmade, but it was resolved. It had a shape now that did not require him to carry it open-ended. He stood and walked out of the courtroom into the institutional corridor, and Zuri was waiting there, which he had not expected, because she had told she would be in back-to-back compliance review meetings all morning and would not be able to attend. She was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. The right arm moved freely, now the injury 4 months behind her, the shoulder back to something close to full function, and she was looking at the floor when he came through the door. She looked up. "I thought you had meetings," he said. "I rescheduled them." He looked at her, without telling me. The meetings were mine to reschedule. She pushed off the wall. "How are you?" He thought about it. "Done," he said. "I feel done with it." "Done is good," she said. "Done is what finished things feel like." They walked down the corridor together, not touching, moving at the pace of 2 people who have somewhere to be, but are not in a rush about reaching it. The building around them was its institutional self-fluorescent lights and worn floor, and the smell of decades of consequential and inconsequential events running together into the specific smell of official places. "He apologized," Jae-hwan said, in the statement. "For the building, I heard," she said. "I wasn't expecting that." "I know," she glanced at him. "How does it land?" He thought about how it landed. About the difference between an apology that resolves something and an apology that merely names it, the difference being that an apology for something irrevocable doesn't undo the thing, but it does change the shape of the space the thing takes up. Stops being unaddressed. It becomes addressed, which is its own kind of completion. "It lands," he said. "I don't know what else to say about it." "That's enough," she said. "It doesn't have to mean more than that right now." In the months that followed, the Kwon organization shed its skin. Not dramatically, not in a single event, but in the accumulative way that real change happens in decisions made at tables, in documents signed and filed, in meetings where someone pushed back, and the pushback in the cup it was heard rather than managed. Criminal adjacent accounts were surrendered over a 6-week period, asset by asset, each one logged and transferred and formally closed under the oversight of Marchetti's team and the compliance framework that Zuri had built piece by piece from the inside out. The legitimate businesses remained. Shipping logistics, real estate, security contracting, all of them operating, all of them generating revenue, all of them now subject to an oversight structure with teeth and with a woman in the executive director seat who used those teeth when she believed they were warranted, which was more often than Jae-hwan initially found, comfortable, and exactly as often as he eventually came to understand was necessary. She escalated 3 things to the oversight board in the first 6 months. The first was a real estate acquisition that Jae-hwan had approved without consulting 2 key stakeholders because he had assessed their opinions as predictable and had skipped the step. She escalated it not because the acquisition was wrong, but because the process had been wrong, and the board agreed, and the acquisition was paused, reconsulted, and ultimately approved with 1 modification that turned out to improve the terms. Jae-hwan told her afterward that she had been right to escalate it. She told him that wasn't the point. He asked what the point was. She said, "The point is that you almost didn't hear it at all. The escalation exists because you almost decided without asking. The almost is the thing we're working on." He sat with that. He was learning to sit with things, she said, rather than responding immediately, which was itself a form of the work she was describing. The second escalation involved a security contractor relationship that had a prior connection to a company in Taesung's network, a connection so peripheral that Jae-hwan had assessed it as irrelevant and approved the contract renewal. Zuri found the connection in a due diligence review, flagged it, and took it to the board, which found that the connection, while genuinely peripheral, created an optics problem that was not worth the contract value. The contract was not renewed. The third escalation was about him directly. She brought to the board a pattern. She had documented 3 instances over 4 months where Jae-hwan had communicated decisions to staff before the decisions had cleared the approval process, effectively bypassing the process by presenting completed facts. The board discussed it. Jae-hwan was not present for the discussion. She received written summary that used the phrase premature communication as a form of authority consolidation, and which was, in its precision, the most uncomfortable document he had read since Marchetti's cooperation framework. He signed an acknowledgement of the pattern and a commitment to the corrective process. He did not resent it. That was the thing he had not expected, that the absence of resentment was itself evidence that something had changed. A year earlier, the board document would have produced something cold and unexamined in him that would have managed itself into silence but not into acceptance. Now it produced discomfort and reflection and the genuine attempt he had promised her. The genuine attempt was imperfect. He skipped steps sometimes. He arranged things sometimes without asking first. She caught him every time and told him every time, and he heard it every time, which was not the same as being perfect, but was the same as being in the process. They argued regularly. Not every day, but often enough that the pattern was established. They disagreed about things. They said so, and neither of them pretended the disagreement wasn't there in order to keep the surface smooth. It was frequently uncomfortable. It was also the most functional working relationship Jae-hwan had maintained in 15 years. At some point during those months, not a specific moment, not a clean, identifiable date, somewhere in the accumulation of ordinary days and difficult meetings and arguments that resolved and arguments that didn't, they crossed a line that neither of them had announced they were approaching. He noticed it one evening when she was still in the office at 7:30 because a compliance filing had a 9 a.m. deadline, and she was the kind of person who would rather work late than feel rushed in the morning. And he was still in the office because he'd told himself it was about the filing, but had stopped pretending that to himself somewhere around 6. They were at his desk with a shared set of documents, and the conversation had moved, without announcement, from the filing to something else. A story she was telling about her father, a specific summer in Savannah when she was 12, and he had taken her to a fishing pier, and she had spent 3 hours pretending to know how to fish in order to have an excuse to sit beside him in the quiet. She told the story without performing it, not as an anecdote but as a fact, something she was offering because it was relevant to a point she was making about patience, about the specific kind of patience required to sit with an outcome that may not come, rather than manufacturing a faster version. He listened to it completely, without planning his response while she talked. Just listened. When she finished, he said, "I don't have fishing memories. My father worked Sundays. What did he do? Fixed things. Small things. Things around the house that had been slightly wrong for weeks, and that he would address on Sunday mornings before anyone else was awake." He paused. "I used to wake up early to watch. He never knew I was there." She looked at him. "That's a fishing pier memory," she said. He thought about it. "Yes," he said, "I suppose it is." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, simply, without making anything of it, "I'm glad you told me that." He looked at her across the shared documents on his desk in the 7:30 office, with the city going dark outside the windows. He thought about the letter in his drawer, about a man who had been more complicated than his memory, about a Sunday morning and the smell of coffee and the sound of small repairs being made before the world woke up. "So am I," he said. The evening in late spring when it finally happened was not dramatic. That was the thing that later he would find most characteristic of her, that she had no interest in manufacturing the scene. It was an ordinary Thursday evening, the city doing its April thing outside the windows, the sky doing that specific deep blue of an urban evening, when the lights below begin to compete with the light above, and neither wins. They were in his office. She was leaving, bag over her shoulder, coat on, the efficient departure of a person who organizes endings as carefully as beginnings. She had stopped at the door to finish a sentence about the compliance board agenda for the following week. She finished the sentence. She looked at him. He was behind his desk, and he was looking at her with the expression that she had cataloged and filed and returned to over 4 years, more often than she had told him and more times than she had told herself. "You have that expression," she said. "I know," he said. "The filing things away expression." "Yes. What are you filing?" He stood up, came around the desk, stopped 2 feet from her, which was the distance at which a man stops when he is not yet certain and is asking a question with his body rather than words. 4 years of arguments, he said. She looked at him. That's a generous framing. 4 years of you being right more often than not, and telling me when I wasn't. That's my job. It was more than your job, he said. You know it was. She looked at him for a long moment. At his face in the evening light, at the 41-year-old face that had not changed substantially in the 4 years she'd been reading it, but had become familiar in the way that changes, how a face looks not different, but known. "You're about to ask me something," she said. "Yes." "You're doing it without asking." He stopped. Then, genuinely stopping, "May I kiss you?" She looked at him for a moment with the expression she got when he did something that she had not fully anticipated, which was rarer than either of them would acknowledge. Something in her face settled, not fell, not softened into sentiment, but settled. The way a decision settles when you've been moving toward it for long enough that making it is less a choice than a recognition. "Yes," she said. It was not a dramatic kiss in the theatrical sense. It did not occur in slow motion. No background swelled. Nothing outside the windows changed. It was 2 people in an office on a Thursday evening, one of them slightly careful about getting kissed, and one of them slightly careful about kissing, and the care on both sides was itself a form of honesty, an acknowledgement that this was real and real things require care. When she pulled back, she looked at him for a moment. He looked at her. "That took 4 years, she said. "I know." "You could have asked sooner." "No," he said. "I couldn't have." She considered that. She was a precise person, and she applied her precision to the consideration, running it back through 4 years of evidence. "No," she said finally, "probably not." He almost said, "You were worth the 4 years." He stopped himself, because it was the kind of thing that was true, but would have been better demonstrated than said, and he had been working, under her specific influence, on the difference between demonstrating things and performing them. Instead, he said, "Your compliance board agenda, the one you were telling me about." She looked at him. "You want to talk about the agenda? I want to hear you finish the sentence you were in the middle of." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she set her bag back down on the desk and sat in the chair across from him, the way she had been sitting in chairs across from him for 4 years, and she finished the sentence. And he listened. In the fall, almost exactly 1 year after the night he'd found her in the building above the river, Jae-hwan and Zuri stood on the terrace of his apartment building, a sound like green wood splitting. A building that had once been the headquarters of an empire that operated in the dark was now the headquarters of something he was still finding language for. The city stretched below them, enormous, lit, indifferent in the way of enormous things, and beautiful in the way of things that don't need to work for their beauty because they've simply been there long enough that the beauty has accumulated. Chicago. He had been born here. He had built something here and rebuilt it here, and was daily in the process of building it again into something different. The city didn't care. It continued being the city. Zuri was beside him, her hands on the railing, looking at the skyline with the particular expression she had when she was thinking about something at a remove from the immediate, not the focused expression of problem-solving, but the quieter one of a person considering the shape of things. "Do you regret it?" she said, not looking at him. He knew what she meant. Not the specific events, the building, the arrest, the months of proceedings, but the larger thing, the 15 years, the empire, the surrender. He looked at the city. He thought about the question, without manufacturing, a ready answer, which was itself evidence of something that he had gotten Imperfectly and over time, Barrett sits inside questions before trying to resolve them. I regret the culture I built, he said. The way it ran on fear. The way I confused control for safety. He paused. I don't regret the work. The logistics company is real. The real estate holds real tenants. The security operation protects real facilities. Things were always real, even when other things weren't. That's not the whole answer, she said. He looked at her. She was still looking at the skyline, and there was something in her profile, the patience in it, the willingness to wait for the full thing rather than the manageable version that had been there from the first week and had not changed. I regret the years I spent believing that the point of power was to not need anyone, he said. I regret what I was around people before you. He paused. I don't know exactly when that changed. It wasn't a single moment. No, she said, it wasn't. It was incremental arguments mostly. We're good at those. Yes, he said, we are. She looked at him then. At his face in the city light, at the 41-year-old face of a man who had spent half his life learning the wrong things and was in the middle of unlearning them. She had been beside him for 4 years, and she knew the specific texture of who he was, the real version, not the managed one. She had not asked him to be different than he was. She had simply consistently refused to let the worst version of him go unchallenged. That was its own form of something. She had not tried to name it for a long time. She didn't feel the need to name it tonight. Taesung was right about one thing, Jae-hwan said. She waited. He said, you made me better at being human without either of us knowing it was happening. He looked at the city. I think I knew, he said. I just didn't have a way to say it. She was quiet for a moment. Then I knew too, when. Earlier than I told you, she said. Significantly earlier. He looked at her. Something moved through his expression. Something that in another man, in a different life, might have been there from the beginning, but in Jae-hwan arrived late and was, because of that, more specifically his. Not the easy warmth of a man for whom things come easily, but the particular warmth of a man who had worked hard for something and knew its value because of what it cost. He took her hand, not dramatically. Just took it the way you take the hand of the person standing beside you when you're looking at something large and you want him to know that you know they're there. She let him. They stood there together in the city light, in the fall air, in the ongoing ordinary extraordinary fact of being two people who had chosen each other across all the easier alternatives, and the city below them continued being the city enormous. Indifferent, lit against the dark, full of lives running in parallel without awareness of intersection. For 15 years, Kwon Jae-hwan had believed that power meant making people obey. He had built his empire on that belief and had run it for long enough that the belief had become invisible to him, not a choice but a climate, the air inside every room he entered. Zuri Ellington had not dismantled that belief. She had simply refused to live inside it, every day, across 4 years, until the climate changed. He had mistaken obedience for loyalty, and fear for respect, and isolation for strength, and none of those mistakes had been corrected in a single conversation or a single event. They had been corrected in the accumulation of ordinary days, in arguments that ended without one of them pretending to lose, in documents she put on his desk without comment because she trusted him to read them, in the way she had sat across from him in a kitchen at 4 a.m. and said the precise right thing without trying to. Fear can force someone to stay. Trust gives them a reason to come back. She had come back on the 12th morning. She had chosen the second contract. She had escalated things to the board and argued with him in meetings and told him when he was wrong without calculating first whether it was safe to tell him. And she had been, for 4 years, the single most useful and most difficult person in his professional life, and she had also been, without either of them making a formal announcement of it, person who had changed the shape of what he believed was possible. He had opened a door once, without controlling who walked through it. She had walked back in, not because of the position, not because of the salary or the authority or the irrevocable term. Because she had spent 11 days in her apartment thinking about the shape of her own life and had arrived at a conclusion. She trusted that what she was walking back into was worth the difficulty, and that the difficulty was itself part of the value, and that A man who asked permission before kissing her, after 4 years of working together, was a man in the genuine process of becoming something. She had told him she missed arguing with him more than she enjoyed being away from him. That was true. It was also not the whole truth, and they both knew it, and neither of them needed to say the rest of it, because the rest of it was apparent in the way they stood on a terrace in the fall, looking at a city they both lived in, his hand around hers, the night doing what nights do. The case was closed. The empire was dismantled and rebuilt and running cleaner than it had ever run under the eyes of a board and a federal oversight agreement and an executive director who used her authority without apology. Kyung Tae had completed his cooperation obligations and was beginning the quiet, difficult work of making a different kind of life in a different city. Taesung was in a federal medical facility, older, served by the particular piece of a man who has finally put down what he was carrying and found, in the putting down, something unexpected. The city below was full of people who did not know any of this. Whose lives had continued in parallel without intersection, who ate their dinners and argued with their families, and went to sleep not knowing that in a building above them, a man who had spent 15 years believing power, meant control, had taken the hand of the woman who had taught him otherwise, and was standing in the dark feeling, for the first time in a very long time, like himself. Not the managed version, not the performed version. Just himself. That was enough. That was, it turned out, everything.